Okay, 6 o'clock, so we'll call our meeting to order. Tonight's meeting is regarding a feasibility study presentation that's being offered to the Northern Town Board. I'll start with this. So I'll give a little order of how we're going to be handling this meeting today. We're going to start with our administrator is going to be given a history of the project, a brief history. And then we're going to have our engineer, Mark Fuller from Freeberg and Grund, do a presentation of the feasibility study. From there, then we're going to be going through, there's a bunch of questions that were asked online beforehand. We'll read through those questions and present the answers that we have for them. Then after that, we will open it up for more questions from the audience first. And after that, then we'll give everybody for 2 minutes if you'd like to come up for, try to stick to about 2 minutes. There's a lot of us here. We don't want to be here all night. I'm sure none of you do either. So we'll try to stick to that. And then please step forward, say your name, and just address the microphone for that. Then after people who have had a chance to speak, we will then do our online questions also. And we'll try to, we're just going to be, the online is going to be just typed only, so they can just type in their questions and we'll read those out loud too. The meeting is being recorded, so that'll be there for anybody who needs, if you have any questions or anything later, that it is being recorded tonight. And the other thing I'll just say is I appreciate everybody coming here. I know a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about the project one way or the other, but we appreciate your attendance. We appreciate your coming forward to talk about this stuff. So with that, I'm going to get started and give Chris a chance to start. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jess. For those of you who don't know me, I am Chris Lane, the Township Administrator, and I just want to take a moment at the beginning of the meeting to give, and you could call it a project overview, but really I think it's going to kind of put some things in a historical context for everybody, going through some of the documentation that I found since working on this project. And then, as Jess said, after that, we'll kick it over to Mark, and he can kind of go through a lot more of the technical aspects, really giving a summary of the feasibility report that we accepted last month. And then we'll, of course, answer any and every question we can for you guys. And we have lots of our experts with the project here to do that as well. Bear with me. Here we go. All right. So just to start off with the general need of the project, why we are even here tonight. One, there were known system failures. Most everybody is probably familiar with the Rutgers situation at this point. That really kicked off a lot of the discussion about 3 years ago. But as you'll see, there has been decades worth of discussion about this idea. And along with the County Road 20 project that was going on, things just really came to a head at once to kind of show us as a board that this is really a time that we needed to take some action on this. Two, aging infrastructure. The Joint Planning Board, back when we were doing joint planning with the City of Bemidji, had initially put together some estimates for us on the age of the septic systems around the lake. They did that by going through all of the records that they had for when systems were installed. And I just recently went back through and redid those numbers as well, just to try to get some current stats, and found that about 63% of the septic systems that I have records for are older than 25 years old. And that's noteworthy because that's about the time of life that people will generally give for when your system would become kind of end of life, typical system's life. We could say like 20 to 30, 25 kind of being the midpoint. It is also worth noting, though, that there are about 30 that I didn't have records for, and being that I don't have records for, it's really likely that they aren't new. So that could push that number up to about 70% of the septic systems that we have around the lake being over 25 years old. Also, general need is just better for the environment. The nature of the lake has changed dramatically over the years. If you looked at the kind of buildings that were on the lake 100 years ago and the density of how many were there, dramatically different today. We see now today lots of very small, densely packed parcels. They are actually smaller than our zoning would typically allow for. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. And then when you just look at the types of soils that we have around here and where the water table is, they're really poor soil types that you would call for septic system filtering. And then also the high water table too means that those nutrients can get down into the water table very easily. Finally, then the other general need would just be better land use. So I already mentioned that we have some small lot sizes, densely packed houses all around the lake. Small cabins have turned into bigger and bigger houses over the years. Removing the septic systems off of these parcels does several things. One, just that it creates more space on your lots to do things with. Currently, we have a 100-foot setback from the lake. If we put the system in, that setback changes to 50. So you'd get that benefit. You would also have the ability to remove any septic tanks, drain fields, what have you, that you currently have on your lot off of the lot, gaining space to potentially build with there as well. And then lastly, and most importantly, almost from my standpoint, because I also do the planning for Northern Township Planning Administration. Anytime somebody tries to build on the lake right now, pretty much just across the board, you're almost guaranteed that they're going to have to ask for some kind of a variance. And it is very safe to say that over half of the properties, if not the vast majority of the properties, are currently already encroaching into these setbacks, especially the lakeside one that I just mentioned that would go from 100 to 50 feet. So doing a system like this, moving that from 100 to 50 feet, we not only will just correct what is already there, just so many houses that are already outside of what the set limits should be, but then of course you'll also open up options for people who do want to do some remodeling, rebuilding, expanding their house. They'll have the opportunity to have more space with which to do that. But overall, just bringing the use that we actually see out there on the lake right now into further compliance and hopefully less variances over time, which is pretty much always when somebody tries to do something right now building wise. So just a couple things I'll highlight, and then I'll get into the history more. Again, the septics, here's the raw numbers that I pulled. 75 of the systems are over 25 years old. The ones that are in the newest category, under 10 years old, there's about 16. This actually is not, so this is as of today. This is the current age ones too. We are looking at the system potentially going live in a couple of years, so those numbers would shift ever so slightly. But again, 63% that we have records for, 25 years old. The 30 that we don't know about, that would bring it up to 70% potentially that are over 25 years old. Again, just kind of a general end of life time frame for septics. Substandard lots. So then this I mentioned previously too. The ordinance is set in this area for the shoreland and also beyond that on the Mississippi Headwaters chain of lakes and the river in Mississippi itself. It's actually set by the Mississippi Headwaters Board, and they do require a minimum lot size of 30,000 square feet. And then this is just looking at all the parcels that are in this project area here and the number that are under that 30,000 square feet. And we have about 72% of the properties that are, again, just considered substandard for size, which makes everything I just described about for land use challenging, just finding spots to put these septic systems that are currently there. There are countless examples of people who didn't have any place to put it, and so they had to go across the road, getting easements from neighbors sometimes, all kinds of things to find a place to put their septics. And then, yeah, we already touched on, it's been developed for over 100 years, and we also have the setbacks that would potentially change going from 100 feet to 50 feet. That would just bring a lot of these properties that are currently out of compliance actually into compliance. So now we'll go through some of the history. Again, this has been decades in the making. We've had meetings here many times before. We've had people who stood up and told us about being on the board back in the 1960s when they were talking about this. I'm going to go through some of the reports that we actually have as far as written records of some of this too. Multiple options over the years have been studied and looked at. And I just want to, right off the bat here, show and kind of impressing everybody that this idea of what would we call a centralized solution for wastewater treatment isn't something that we just came up with now. This has been a consistent recommendation and things that multiple boards, multiple governmental groups between Bemidji and Northern Township, even to the county, they've all been working towards for decades. And why is a good question to ask. There's a few of the reasons why. Single managed system is going to be a lot easier to maintain over time rather than hundreds of individual septic systems. It's going to move the wastewater management further away from the lake. Right now we have some septic systems that would never be allowed to be where they are today. They were put in a long time ago. And our system is talked about probably like a half mile off of the lake. So it's definitely moving it further away from the lake. This type of a system has a much higher standard that it needs to treat to. So we're certainly not saying that septic systems can't treat effectively. They can. But what we are doing here today is going to be treating that to a much higher standard with also much more ongoing monitoring that just doesn't exist, as we can see from our age of septic systems. There is no compliance system in place for that other than when somebody sells a house essentially right now. And then finally, we've talked about the land use, just creates better land use conditions with more buildable space. So 1975, this is one of the first reports we have. This one came from Beltrami County, and they studied what is to be done with the growing density that was happening on the lake at the time. And in the conclusion of that report, they recommended hooking up to the city, which had, I don't remember the exact date, but just a few years prior to that probably installed their system that they have down there today. Then we can flash forward to the 2000s, and this is going to be shortly after we installed a cluster system over in the Waville area. So we do have a cluster system over there today, their own subordinate district. And then the following year, they did a study to see what it would look like if we did those systems around the lake. Very interesting to read through. Some of the challenges that would go along with that was just the cost, the ongoing management, and probably the biggest point and why it isn't something that we necessarily see as a well, at least a better option than what we're looking at right now, is just the ability to find the locations for all these systems. They had mapped out, I think it was 6 or 7 different cluster systems that they would have wanted to put in around the lake. And it's just really hard to come up with a land for all of those different systems. Then we go forward to 2005. And the town board at the time did actually move on trying to put in some kind of a system over here on the west side of Lake Bemidji. This would have been back off of the boat access landing, what is it, Lakewood Avenue, up on the hill there, I think is where it was slated to go. And they went as far to prepare an entire report that was going to be submitted to the MPCA. It's like hundreds of pages long, I think. And then, as some in the room here probably are aware of, began discussions of, instead of doing this, connecting to the City of Bemidji system. And that is what actually turned into the Birchmont Drive project. So then when the MPCA found out that there was a possibility of connecting to the system, they preferred that over this cluster type system, I think it was, that they were talking about at the time. So that's ultimately what ended up happening. They extended city sewer out to those residents. That project, I'll mention this again later in some other context too, but just so y'all know, that project was assessed to those residents at 100% of the cost, and the residents were also annexed into the city during that project.
Come on, anybody wants to sit up front?
Yeah, no problem. And then you maybe didn't hear, or maybe you have, but anybody who wants to come up front, there is a few seats open in the second row too. So if you want to stand, that's totally fine too, just so you know.
I'll interrupt once more, Chris.
Yeah.
Also, I've seen some people taking photos. These slides will be available. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's no reason at all. We can definitely put that up online. And not only that, but the recording will be up online too. We'll have a link on our websites, but it's going to be like on the township's YouTube channel eventually. So that's it for that slide. On to 2012. 2012, this one's kind of an interesting situation. There was what was thought to be a septic failure over the Birchmont Court area that was considered an imminent threat to the public, I believe is how you term it. And in reaction to that, the township was able to secure some grants to do a community action report. So in 2012, we have a community action report that looked at a few different options for how to solve the bigger issue. Obviously, not just that individual septic that was deemed at the time an imminent threat to public health. And I should also notice, and I just mentioned right off the bat, that at the end of it, for whatever reason, they did decide that it wasn't an imminent threat anymore. So I don't even know if that septic system was ultimately replaced at the time. It doesn't really matter, but just throwing that out there, it wasn't an imminent threat in the end. But we had this community action report. And again, they looked at 3 main options. One was the township would manage all of the septic systems around the lake. And some of the residents have pointed out Ottertail as another community around here in Minnesota that does just this. So this would be that exact option. That entails the township essentially owning everybody's septic system, and then all the individual houses would be responsible for making the connection to the septic. There's a lot of really interesting administrative things that would have to go along with that. The nice thing, no doubt, right off the bat, is that does come in as the cheapest solution. And so that is why, obviously, that was looked at as one of the solutions. Number 2 is the cluster systems, and we already touched on that a little bit. The township had previously been looking at that. And then number 3 was looking at that in comparison to a centralized solution, which was connecting to the City of Bemidji system. So after all that was said and done, a lot of the local leaders, including the Joint Planning Board, which was still in existence at that point, and then Northern Township Board especially, and even some local septic people who do septic inspections, they had all recommended connecting to the city as the best long-term solution. It is no doubt that it comes with a higher cost than some of these other ones, but just going back to especially a lot of the land use considerations is one of the #1 reasons that you hear brought up again and again, that they would recommend that as the best solution moving forward. The other thing that's worth noting right off the bat too is I did mention that the septic managed solution comes in at a lower cost, but when you look at different time horizons, you see that these things definitely level out. And in that report, you saw just that too. They looked at like a 25-year span, and the managed septic system solution, like I said, is the cheapest. The connecting the city sewer is the most expensive on that time horizon. But when you go out to 50 years, those numbers become very similar. And it's kind of simple, I guess you could, when you think about it, just that the lifespan of a municipal system is much greater, estimated 50 to 100 years, and a septic system, as we've been talking about, much less than that. So somebody's gonna have to replace their septic system 2 or 3 times in that time period, and that's why those numbers start to level out over time. So recent history, again, a lot of people probably know about this already, but we'll just touch on it. Rutgers in 2021 had their septic issue that sparked a lot of this conversation. Then we also found out about County Road 20 that wanted to do, the county wanted to do a reconstruction project on County Road 20. And as we were looking at all that, we realized right away that that would save the project if we were able to do some kind of this centralized type system, a lot of money. We estimate over $1 million. The city offered to extend the system all the way out to the state park with annexation. That was some of the first conversations that we had. We met with the Northern Township residents. It was a meeting in the fall sometime out at the county fairgrounds. We had quite a lot of people at that one. And it was a very, very clear takeaway after that meeting that none of the residents, I shouldn't say none, the vast majority of the residents had no appetites at all for annexation, and that was a clear direction they gave us. There was a handful of people that would have been okay with it. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Then the city of Bemidji in Northern Township had multiple meetings. We sat down several times to go over possible solutions to this. And then I believe it was in January of 2022 when the city of Bemidji gave the township, I think it was 6 different proposals. 5 of them were all related to annexation. 1 of them involved the township paying for the money essentially to put the pipes in the ground that could connect to their system. And this is what aligned with what our residents had directed us at the time. So that was what we pursued. It entailed us coming up with funding for it, of course. And in 2022 and 2023, we were able to get federal grants through the Congressional Directed Spending Program. We got $5 million the first time, another $1 million the second time, for a total of $6 million. And that's when we went back to the city. We were actually talking throughout this whole period, but just asking, now that we have the money in hand, what are the next steps? And we had several more meetings after that, and I think it was in May or so of 2023. They officially rescinded that offer and just went back to what their policy had always been before that. Nobody can connect to their system unless they become a resident of the city. So that left us in a spot where we had $6 million that nobody had ever been able to secure for a project like this, even though centralization has been talked about and recommended year after year, decade after decade. We wanted to not just let that money go to waste and looked at alternative solutions. The first alternative solution that made the most sense was to put in a pond system. Takes a much bigger footprint than what we're going to be talking to you about tonight, but we were able to find basically just one site that would have been really viable for us to do that type of a system on, and it was a school trust land parcel over on the east side of the lake, and that is managed by the DNR. We began discussions with them to figure out how we could somehow put that system on that parcel, and we thought it might entail purchasing or leasing. We quickly found out that leasing wasn't going to be an option with them, and then unfortunately after I think it was 6 or 8 months and several meetings, going all the way up to essentially some of the highest leadership in the DNR, we found out that they really just don't even have a process in place to divest, to sell these parcels. And they said that if we wanted them to create one, we would be waiting a really, really long time, which we didn't have. So they were trying to be as upfront as they could about it all. We definitely appreciated that. But it was very apparent with the County Road 20 being the thing that's really setting the timeline for this, they have to construct in 2026, that we needed to find another solution if there was another one. And we looked last at a mechanical plant solution. We honestly did think going into it that that was going to be a much more expensive solution, and that's why we hadn't looked at it as closely until this point. But then we're pleasantly surprised that when we looked into it again, that it actually ended up coming in less expensive than we expected. So at that point, we start just looking at all the viability and can we afford this, running financial analysis, running site analysis. And in the summer of 2024, we got to the point where we realized that it is, in fact, viable given the amount of money that we have. And I'll just say it right now, and we'll say it probably multiple times tonight, we're always looking for more money to make this project even more affordable. But the thing that really sets this project apart today and right now is that we have funding in place that we've never had before. So I was already touching on some of these alternatives. Again, we've talked about some of the previous reviewed options over the decades, including individual managed systems, cluster systems. Those ones especially don't solve the land use issues whatsoever. Many people have no place on their lots currently for these systems. It keeps the septics right on the lake. For cluster systems, we'd have to secure multiple treatment sites, and the cost is similar over longer time horizons. We also looked at an alternative, of course, as we mentioned, hooking up to the city, and unfortunately, there just isn't a path forward there without annexation. Our residents have told us very plainly and clearly that is not something that they want. The city did also offer at various times the idea of merging the two entities altogether, but again, our residents didn't want anything with annexation or a merger. Then we looked at the pond system, and then finally, just worth noting is the option of do nothing. I mean, it technically is there, but we would want to point out that if we did do nothing, it doesn't mean that the system isn't going in. It just means it's not going in today. In reality, the system is going in someday. It's going to go in, if not today, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and most likely it will be going in by connecting to the city and with annexation. Unless somehow we got more funding down the road that we could make this entire thing more affordable. But I don't know that that's necessarily the case with the way that things are lining up right now. So in conclusion, many options have been studied over the years. Centralization connecting to the city's system especially had always been a theme that recurs consistently as a recommendation. And why, again, we've already touched on, but just a single managed system is much easier than hundreds of individual systems, moves the wastewater management further away from the lake, treats wastewater to a higher standard than individual systems, and it creates, probably in my mind, as a planning administrator, better land use conditions with more buildable space. Why the solution then, and why now? Again, residents are clear annexation is not an option. And I think this really, really is important and needs to be stressed over and over again. We have $6 million today that we have never, ever had in the history of people looking at this before. This allows us to do the project at a lower cost than hooking up to the city. I didn't mention yet, but when we were talking about hooking up to the city, that did also include water. That wouldn't allow us to do the scope of the project that we're talking about now, and it would increase the cost of the project substantially. Plus the ongoing connection fees for people, whether they're in city or if we actually were able to come to an agreement as a township to a city, would have been much higher than what we're proposing. And then also pointing out here that in 2008, the assessments that did happen for the Birchmont Drive project, they were at $14,000 for sewer-only options at the time. And if you do some inflation adjustment for that, that's over $22,000 today. And we'll get into more details, of course, later. But our average assessment right now for this project, because of the funding we have, is $14,000. And we're 16 years out from when the Birchmont Drive project happened. So it is really incredible to think that 16 years later, we can come in at the exact same price and potentially even lower. And then lastly, why now? And one of the most important ones is that County Road 20 is slated to be done in 2026. And by combining our two projects together, that's going to save our project well over $1 million. And then just a couple last things here, wrapping this part up. The current snapshot of the project, phase 1, that is going from the boat landing over on the west side of Lake Bemidji to the Lavinia boat access on the northeast side. Project costs coming in at $12.8 million. We have secured the funding, of course, is $6 million in grants. A portion of the project will be paid for most likely from township road funds. And then that would leave it about $5.1 million in assessable costs, somewhere in the $5 million range. We'll go over this a little bit more in detail, but we're going to be doing assessments based on an equivalent benefited front footage calculation. And that comes up currently at about $165, per that lineal foot. These assessments would, did I have that on there? So that actually makes the average assessment, because I think the average property was about 85 feet, makes the average assessment about $14,000. And then you would have the option to pay that assessment off over a 15 or a 20-year period. Some of these details are obviously works in progress. And then the monthly fees for the ongoing, when you're connected to the system, are slated to come in at about $55 a month right now. One thing that would be new to a lot of people probably in the room here is their connection timeline. In the past, we've been talking about a mandatory hookup within 5 years. But in looking at some more recent numbers, again, nothing set in stone, but it is looking like it's feasible for us to offer a longer connection timeline for people who have newer septics. So going back to the septic age slide I had up there before, there was like 16, I think that it said on there. In reality, like for systems that are 5 years and newer, I think there's about 6. So they would fall into a category where they have a longer connection timeline available to them. And then anybody, as you get closer to that 20 and 25 years current age of your septic system, they would have 5. So nothing set in stone exactly what that's looking like, but as you can see, 5 to 15 years potentially, depending on the age of your current septic system, would be when that mandatory connection would kick in. And hopefully for people who have newer systems, you can get more life out of your current system than that way before you would connect to this system. Finally, just wrapping up the summary, the benefits: environmental protection, connecting to this municipal system helps protect groundwater, improved water quality, maintaining water quality, I guess, preventing any further degradation in Lake Bemidji and the Mississippi River, the entire watershed. You get more flexibility in your land use. We've talked about being able to build more things, bigger things, get closer to the lake, things like that, and then just coming into compliance with current zoning ordinances. Enhanced property value is probably going to be the number one thing at the end of the day that you'll be receiving as a benefit for paying for the system here. Properties that are served by municipal systems in general are more valuable and marketable. And then lastly, for the community at large, this is the type of thing that could help attract new residents and businesses especially too. And be able to connect to an infrastructure like that would help protect them. And it is our hope too that over time, who knows exactly what that time frame is, but that we'd be able to extend this out to other places in the township. The system definitely has the capacity to do so. It's also in a modular nature where we can add on to it should we need to. So it would be entirely feasible that we could have sewer services over to, say, our commercial district or just other places in the township to be able to serve other people of the community. And then the last thing, pretty sure this is the last slide, is just to give you a little visual of what I'm talking about when I talk about the land use benefits. On the left-hand side there, you see what it is currently today for setback zoning type requirements. Your house has to be 100 feet from Lake Bemidji. Your side yard setbacks are 10 feet. You have to be 50 feet from a county road. And so you can see, like in this example, somebody is of course going to want a garage, and that already puts them outside of the buildable space. And then this is a common thing that we see around the lake. There's not really room for the septic tank and the drain field, so a lot of times they have to find space across the road, work with their neighbors, get easements, what have you, and a portion of their current individual system isn't even on the property, it's across the road. Then on the right, after the system would go in, the zoning changes, and now you'll see a 50-foot setback, and this exact same configuration now can fit entirely within what is allowable by our ordinance. And you no longer have that septic tank that needs to be on your property anywhere, so you're just getting more buildable space for your property all around. And again, this would definitely help with improved marketability and land value, as there's just so much more usable land, and you don't have to deal with septic systems for potential buyers. So that is all I had to kick things off. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark next, and he's going to go over some more of the technical aspects in the feasibility report.
Thanks, Chris. The feasibility report that we did is available online, and that's on the website. I'm going to give a summary of it, and then we'll work into some questions. Northern Township is advancing efforts to construct a municipal sanitary sewer collection and treatment system to replace aging individual septic systems. Phase 1 includes properties between Northwoods Access in the west and Beach Lane and Lavinia Access in the east, aiming to address environmental, public health, and regulatory challenges while ensuring financial and operational sustainability. We've prepared a feasibility report to advise the board in a preliminary way as to the proposed improvement is necessary, cost-effective, and feasible, and as to whether the project should move forward as proposed or in connection with some other improvement. First section we're looking at is necessity. From an environmental and a public health risk standpoint, shoreland areas around Lake Bemidji face significant constraints for effective septic treatment, including small lot sizes, high groundwater levels, sandy soils with poor filtration, and proximity to drinking water wells and the lake. Phosphorus and nitrate leaching from failing or aging septic systems impact Lake Bemidji, contributing to algal blooms, degraded water quality, and public health risks from contaminated drinking water. Regulatory compliance, Lake Bemidji is classified as mesotrophic with nutrient levels that have exceeded MPCA's phosphorus limits. A centralized sewer system ensures compliance through continual monitoring of treated effluent with nutrient limits and protects the lake's ecological health by treating wastewater more effectively than septic systems. Aging infrastructure and oversight issues. Many septic systems in the area, as Chris mentioned, are over 20 to 30 years old, nearing or exceeding their functional lifespan. Without regular inspections, failing systems often go unnoticed, leading to nutrient pollution and environmental degradation. Regarding downstream impacts, as the headwaters of the Mississippi River, nutrient pollution from Lake Bemidji has broader implications affecting downstream water quality, including nutrient-driven hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico. Protecting Lake Bemidji benefits both local and regional ecosystems. Zebra mussels and phosphorus. Zebra mussels in Lake Bemidji have temporarily reduced phosphorus in the water column by filtering it, but when they die, the phosphorus is reintroduced, leading to potential algal blooms. This highlights the need for sustainable phosphorus management through effective wastewater treatment. The next section that's within the report is cost effectiveness. First category is efficient design. The project leverages proven industry standard methods for wastewater collection and treatment. By utilizing existing public corridors and aligning with Beltrami County's County Road 20 project, costs and construction impacts are minimized. Federal funding, as Chris noted, we have $6 million EPA grant that offsets nearly half of the $12.8 million project cost, significantly reducing the financial burden on residents. Shared costs. Large commercial and government users, including Lake Bemidji State Park, will cover approximately 38% of the project costs while generating approximately 30% of the flows. So again, 38% of the project costs while generating 30% of the flows, spreading the financial impact and supporting sustainability. Affordable rates and assessment. The monthly sewer fees will align with nearby Bemidji city rates. Residential property owners are responsible for 60% of the costs excluding the treatment plant, equating to roughly 45% of the total cost. So that's 60% of the assessed value is just for the collection system.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yep. Residential property owners are responsible for 60% of the costs excluding the treatment plant, equating to roughly 45% of the total project costs. Gravity flow design. The system prioritizes cost-effective gravity-fed connections, minimizing the need for lift or grinder pumps. Pump-assisted connections will only be required in specific cases, such as properties at lower elevations or significant distances from the main sewer line. So under the feasibility section, planning and design, a full topographic survey and initial plan and profile designs confirm the practicality of the project. These included detailed layouts for gravity mains, sanitary manholes, lift stations, and preliminary disturbance limits, ensuring an efficient and functional system. Site suitability. Soil investigations confirm that the designated treatment and dispersal site is appropriate for sustainable operations, supporting effective nutrient removal and groundwater protection. Proven models. Similar shoreland sanitary systems have demonstrated the effectiveness of centralized sewer systems in managing nutrient loading and improving water quality. Integration with other projects. The sewer project is planning alongside Beltrami County's County Road 20 road project and stormwater improvements, reducing standalone costs and limiting disruptions to the community. Assessment for the total project cost. The total project cost is estimated at $12.8 million, with $6 million secured through EPA grants and the remaining costs distributed among township funds, bonding, and property assessments. And for those residential assessments, we have approximately $5.1 million being assessed to local property owners, with costs allocated equitably based on lot size. These calculations are using equivalent benefited frontage, which is the lot size divided by average depth, to ensure fairness across property types. This project is essential for addressing Lake Bemidji's water quality challenges, protecting public health, and ensuring compliance with environmental regulations. By combining federal funding, shared costs, and thoughtful design, Northern Township is advancing a sustainable and financially viable solution to wastewater management. And again, just to reiterate, that is just a summary. The full feasibility report is also online, and that was presented at last month's meeting, I believe November 12th.
Do you want to do the introduction of our non-board members?
Absolutely. So I have here with me again Mark Fuller with Freeberg and Grund Consulting Engineers. I've got Ben Roomy with Braun Intertech on the environmental side. I've got Brian Oakley from Bar Engineering. I've got Justin Foshing from Bar Engineering, and I've got Bob Whitmire from Matrix Soil Systems. So engineers and professional scientists predominantly.
Thank you. Say Mark and Justin. Jason.
Yeah, and then, so any questions come up here tonight, of course, of more technical nature, it's going to be down on this side. We also have our attorney here, Jason Kabushik. So any legal questions, we can have answered by him. Mark Borseth, many of you probably met along the way too. He's helping us out as like a consultant. He used to be our part-time administrator. And then, of course, hopefully you know everybody else up here as members of the board and Mary, our clerk. And then Jess, if it's okay, the next thing that we'll do before we just jump into answering questions for everybody out here is go through some of the questions that we've had submitted to us online. I'm sure some of them will be duplicates, so maybe you'll get your question answered just by going through this. But of course, afterwards, you can come up for further clarification or questions that we didn't cover. So I'm going to go through a few of these, and I'll pass it back over to Mark to go through some of the more technical ones again, and then we'll open it back up to everybody after that. Okay, and I should say too, some of these aren't necessarily even questions, they're more statements, but I think it'll just be helpful to kind of respond to it. So maybe I'll do my best to turn it into a question, or I don't know, we'll just see how this goes, I guess. But first one is, we've heard this several times along the way, that the project is unwanted by the vast majority of the residents that are required to hook up. And just like right off the bat, of course, we just want to acknowledge the fact that we would love to have 100% unanimous support for this project, and that it is very important to us as Northern Township and the board to try to address people's concerns whenever we can. And we have multiple examples that we can bring up here tonight too, where I think we can show that that's exactly what we're trying to do. And if you have other things that we can do, we want to hear about it, and we want to try to address your concerns. That all being said though too, I do want to point out that especially me in my position, I'm interacting with people probably more directly than a lot of people on the board. There are plenty of people around the lake within the project here that are indeed supportive of it. They're probably not going to come to a meeting like this and just stand up in front of everybody, but especially when you look like neighborhood by neighborhood, some of them, to me, really does feel like it's 50-50. Others, it's not. It's a little bit more one-sided versus the other. But just so everybody is aware, like I am definitely hearing from people unsolicited. I'm not asking them for their opinion, that they are very happy about this for a multitude of different reasons. So then, more of a statement again, but many residents maintain compliant and well-maintained individual systems. And it is, of course, certainly true that there are going to be compliant and well-maintained systems out there around the lake. But as I had pulled up earlier with the numbers of the ages of the septics, the vast majority of them are over 25 years old. And just because you are flushing the toilet and the waste is going away doesn't necessarily mean that the septic is doing what it's supposed to be doing as far as compliance goes. The way that things are set up right now, nowadays, the only time a compliance check really happens is when a property is sold. And those are really the only rare instances when somebody's going to find out that their septic is indeed non-compliant. Some of our engineers over here can speak to it later too, but as they've been up here and doing their analyses and driving around on the sites, they just even visually have seen many, many signs of septic systems that are exhibiting the fact that they are not compliant. Like I said, they can speak to that a little bit more later. Next we'll have, it is inequitable to impose additional costs, including hookup fees on homeowners with compliance systems. And here, just wanted to point out that assessments legally need to be applied to all properties with the potential to connect, ensuring that the system's installation costs are shared equitably. We definitely understand the concern about costs for homeowners with a newer compliance system, and that is why, as I mentioned before earlier, we were looking for ways to make those situations better. And it is looking like, with our financial analysis that we've most recently had, that there is a path forward for offering longer connection timelines for people who have newer systems. And so, yes, at the end of the day, the assessments still just need to be paid for upfront because that's the cost to install the pipes. Everybody shares that cost equally. When it goes to the ongoing cost and actually paying monthly fees for using the system, if you have a newer compliant working septic system, you should have the ability to get more life out of that septic system before you connect to this system and start paying the monthly fees for that. So then we have the financial burden appears to be disproportionately on the resident property owners, such as Lavinia Road seasonal residents, compared to the larger commercial users like Rutgers, State Park, DNR, golf course, what have you. And then it points out too, yeah, commercial entities have significantly higher usage and growth expectations, warranting a fair cost distribution. And Mark had already touched on this, so hopefully I can say the similar numbers here, but the commercial portion of the assessment is 38%. That's how much that they are paying towards the total assessable costs, but they are generating 29.4% of the flows. That means that 71% of the flows are being generated by the residents, and they are paying for 62% of the assessable costs. So really only trying to point out there that the statement isn't entirely accurate. It's actually like the other way around, where the 4 larger systems are actually paying proportionately based on their usage a little bit more for the assessable costs. And then also, no, let's see, that was something else. So then the next one, disproportionate effect on individual property owners as compared to the larger entities. Let's see, borders on the obscene. This person lived alone in a 3-bedroom house for 4 months of the year. Their assessment was $37,000. The golf course creates more sewage in 3 days than they do in the summer, but it's been told that they'll only pay about $225,000. So here we need to point out the fact that we don't want to confuse the cost to install the system with the ongoing cost to use the system. And again, that's going to be the difference between assessments and the difference between monthly fees. So the assessments, again, everyone shares a proportionate cost to install the system, and that is based on that EBF we talked about, a lineal footage, because the project itself, we're assessing out just the pipes. We're not assessing out the treatment plant, and it's looked like we're not even going to assess out the roads. It'll be just the pipes. It's a lineal project. The pipe is so many feet that touches everybody's property. And then on top of that, I think it's actually more helpful to compare the assessment cost, that is, to what it would cost somebody to install a new septic system. Again, we're looking at about a $14,000 assessment fee right now. And when we've talked to several different septic people, and these guys over here would have a good handle on it and opinion on it too, they're telling us $15,000 on the extreme low end to $30,000. More commonly in this area, you see a lot of mound systems, so it's like $25,000 to $30,000. So again, comparing the $14,000 assessment to that cost, you see that we're in the same ballpark, if not even lower. And then, as I've already pointed out too, you also have to remember the expected lifespan of our system is 50 to 100 years. That cost for a new septic system you could compare against, you'd have to do it ×2 or ×3, because most likely you'd be replacing that septic system multiple times over the course of the lifetime of this system. And then the other part was the monthly usage fees. Everybody does pay a proportional amount based on the category that they fall into for their estimated usage. And it's called equivalent dwelling unit. And basically, these guys can correct me if I'm wrong and explain it better too, but just identifies what the typical usage would be for a single residential house. They get assigned a value of 1, and then the larger units get estimated, and in some cases even just calculated, because we have some flow information, how many of these EDUs that they equate out to. So the larger systems are going to be paying an exact proportional amount based on how much they are using, and then the individual single family and residential, they're all being paying monthly fees on that single EDU. But there's really not a lot of variability if we were able to put on some kind of a flow meter type thing, to the point where you'd see much difference month to month. Everybody's going to be in the same ballpark there either. You will see when there are projects that have water and the sewer at the same time, sometimes they monitor the water to try to get some variable costs in there. That being said, a lot of times they still just have a flat fee, and then the variable part is just a portion of the fee based on water usage above that. This type of way of setting the monthly cost is a very common way of doing this for systems like ours where we won't have water. This EDU type method just is kind of like an industry standard way of doing that. And I just mentioned too why we aren't doing the measuring of flows. We don't have water as part of this project, and there just really isn't a realistic way to install some kind of a flow meter on everybody's septics to measure it. So we're just doing what is an industry standard method when you don't have those things available to you. So special assessments must not exceed the benefit to the property. For those with compliance systems, this project does not demonstrably improve property value. We urge the township to revisit this proposal to better balance equity, cost effectiveness, and community consensus. And so here again, we're going to point out that the expected lifespan of this type of a system is 50 to 100 years. Installing individual septics of lifespan anywhere from 15 to 30, 20 to 30, whatever you have to term it at. It's going to be multiple times you'd have to install a septic system to get the same usage out of this one. Where else do we have? Then you're also going to see that our assessment is coming in at around $14,000, which is going to be less than or around the exact same ballpark of installing a new septic system. And then we have already talked a lot, and we'll probably talk again about the land use benefits, that being probably the biggest driver of increased value to the property. So at the end of the day, especially just from the land use perspective, we really just think it is very apparent that the increased value to the properties will indeed outweigh the assessments, which is a legally required requirement. Now we have a few alternatives that people had asked about. One is grandfathering compliance systems. And as I mentioned, that we were hoping to offer variable connection timelines to people, so you will have longer, in fact, to connect. And at the end of the day, too, we do just have that 63 to 70% of the systems that are over 25 years old. They are very old, and just on age alone, warranting connection as soon as possible. Offering targeted services to commercial users and residents who request them. And unfortunately, this one just isn't feasible. There would just be large sections along the path of the system where there would be no customers. And you just can't run a system that way, especially from a financial standpoint. It just isn't viable, unfortunately. Then we also had some of the other solutions, and like we've already mentioned that one about the managed septic system, similar to how we have in Otter Tail. Again, my personal opinion there is that land use is probably the #1 reason why we prefer this over that. You have more room to build with a centralized solution. You have better compliance with current zoning. There's going to be less variances across the board that people need whenever they do a building project. And then some people just don't even have room for those septic systems currently and are running them across the road. When you have a managed septic system, none of those problems go away. They just stay there. Furthermore, we are also treating our dispersal material to a higher standard, so there's going to be fewer nutrients going into the ground. And it also gets the sewage itself just off the lake completely. Many septic systems, as I mentioned, are on the lakeside of properties. They're places that we would never even allow today. Having the centralized solution gets it half mile off of the lake, and there's no more septics around the lake. Next, we have incorporating water infrastructure to align with future projects and enabling equitable monthly assessments. I touched a little bit about why we don't have the ability to bill monthly based on water usage. And then also on top of that, just stating that we, of course, would love to be able to add water to this project. It is not financially feasible. It doesn't exactly double the project, but it would be somewhat close. And we just don't have the money to do that right now. That is definitely something that we would love to explore down the road and hope that we could add it to that area at some point in time. And then with the monthly assessment thing, billing, I had already touched on that EDU method of billing is just a common way to do billing with a project, a system in our situation. Then we have when the residents ask for the monthly rates to be similar to how Otter Tail does it, because they do have variable rates depending on if you're a full-time or a part-time resident. This says that the response that they had heard from the board was that everyone has to pay all year round to cover the costs. And then they made the comment here that this tells them that the cost is too high, that they, us, the board, I guess, Northern Township, can't even allow part-time versus year-round monthly payments. And then again, as I've been pointing out, it is a very common way to do the billing, to have that EDU type billing. And then it's just very common as well on a municipal system like this that you just don't have part-time available. If it were financially feasible for us to do it, I could totally see the board entertaining that. It just plain old isn't, unfortunately. And you're going to see in many other communities where they have systems like this, that this is exactly how it's done. People pay year-round for these systems. Let's see, I think I just have a few more. Bear with me here. I strongly believe assessed septic costs to residents should not be based on linear foot of waterfront as a project currently proposes. Instead, costs should be based on the actual septic usage, impact, contribution to the load on the septic system. So here does give us a chance to talk about some of the alternative ways we have looked at this. First is just pointing out again that the highest use entities are paying a proportionate amount for their monthly usage. There's 4 really large systems, Rutgers DNR State Park and the golf course, and they're shouldering 38% of the assessable costs, as we mentioned, and then it legally has to be proportionate. And in our case, we're using that EBF method to assess out those costs. And then the other 200-ish assessable properties are paying for about 60% of that. And then some of the other models that we did look at for how we can do those assessments included just plain old square feet. The bigger your lot was, the more you paid. The smaller it was, the less you paid. Looking at those equivalent dwelling units, how we're doing the monthly billing, and just separating out the assessments based on that. And we had a few hybrids that we looked at in there as well. And there's costs and benefits to every single one that you choose. At the end of the day, we picked one that I feel like mitigates those negatives especially and highlights the positives better than the other ones. Some of them just made the assessments, they're just like absolutely astronomical for a very small number of people. And the one too, like where you treated everybody basically as one user and just kind of try to divide it up amongst everybody equally like there, that brings the entire average assessment up 30% across the board. For some of the people who had smaller lots, that's going to bring it up dramatically more, probably like 150%. So at the end of the day, when we looked at this EBF model, it just seemed like it was the most fair and equitable, kept the assessments down for the largest number of people, and it also allowed for the systems that are on bigger lots, such as the 4 commercial ones, to pay more because they have bigger lots, and this is a way to capture the size of their lots into the assessable costs. Question about Rutgers. In 2018, Rutgers Resort was sold to new owners. When the business was sold, why were they allowed to purchase that property without upgrading their septic system? Rutgers did a big renovation remodel, all while having a broken system. Did the township fail to enforce a policy making them compliant with the system failure? The township, that is, compliant with the system failure. So some of the highlights, I guess, of that history there. The JPB was the supervising local septic authority at the time. So if you needed a septic permit, you went into the JPB. And the township, of course, has worked with the JPB and ultimately the MPCA over all the past several years with its entire situation. There was a variance case that the question statement had alluded to in 2018 that went through the Joint Planning Board. And part of the variance case was exactly that. It noted that they had a failing septic system. They have multiple systems on that property. One was failing, and it had to be brought into compliance. The JPB specifically followed up with them several times. We have some records noting it in 2019 and 2021 to find out the status of what was going on. And ultimately, all along, the MPCA was involved in all this, and Rutgers was working with them to figure out a timeline and a solution. We had already touched on exactly what had happened with this whole project kind of stemming in 2021. And at that point is when we started working with the MPCA a lot closer to, and the MPCA started granting Rutgers extensions because they were now looking at the possibility of either connecting to the City of Bemidji system, or now we're talking about this project. And again, the MPCA has been involved with this every step of the way. and they are under a legal extension with the MPCA. I can say it's getting to the end of these extensions where if this project didn't go forward now, Rutgers would just have to install a septic system of their own. But of course, we are hopeful that we are going to have this project move forward, so that will solve their problem as well. And then it is worth noting too that Rutgers has been pumping from holding tanks this entire time. So it is at no small expense to them, of course, while they're waiting for this to find out what happens with the system. Next up, we have when this person had spoke with Mark Fuller after our August township meeting. Let's see, they mentioned hearing that Rutgers wanted to give up easement land and be allowed to stub in for free, and that Mark had told this person that they can't do that. And the simple answer there is that there is no deal to allow Rutgers to stub in for free. So that's just not a thing. At the meeting on November 12th, the board talked about getting easement land for for the wastewater plant at a cost of $35,000 and allowing free assessments to the properties on Lavinia Road. And then we actually have one over here in Birchmont Court too. And here, the easement payments, if you want to call that, or wiping out the assessment for the exchange of the easement, is a substantial benefit, quite honestly, to the project. And that really is the key. At the end of the day, the township has the ability to enter into agreements with people when we can show that it is at a benefit to the entire project and to the entire community. So, for example, over in Birchmont Court, the assessments, I think, were coming in at around $30,000 that were going to be waived. And in exchange, that is going to give the project savings well over $100,000. So coming out way ahead for the residents, that is cost savings to you, helping bring down assessment costs. On the other side of the lake, we had a exchange for a similar amount of assessments. I think it was around $30,000. And then a cash payment of $1,000. What was that? Oh, the microphone. Let's see. Let's start that statement again. Where were we? $35,000 cash payment. Yeah. Okay. So Lavinia side. So $35,000. So then first, it's worth noting over on that side that easement is for a quarter-mile stretch of land that we need to run the pipe from Lavinia Road back to where the plant is supposed to be. In doing so, we can avoid running the pipe all the way down and around, say, Wild Plum over to either the bike trail or all the way out to the county highway to make its way back over to the plant. That easement is going to save the project most likely well over $300,000. So again, this benefit to the project and to the residents is substantial. And that is ultimately what the township is using as the justification for entering into agreements like that. It's something that is a win-win for everybody. Hopefully everybody would agree. We are also hearing that the residents on Birchmont Court will have their assessment fees for properties across the road waived. If I would have thought about it, I would have pulled up a picture. So this one is going to be helpful because we can explain a category of properties to people. And if this happens to be you, we'd love to talk to you about this too. The Birchmont Court has lakeside properties, of course, then the road itself, Birchmont Court, and then on the backside, they have these back lots, the majority of which have no house on. There's some that have some garages on. But what ended up happening is back in the 1980s, there was a variance request down at the Beltrami County to subdivide those lots into a similar configuration they're in today. It's not even actually exactly the same as they are today. And at the time, there was conditions put on the granting of this variance. The conditions entailed that those lots had to be combined with the lakeside lots and that they wouldn't be built with any habitable structures. So we have this category then of lots where it is a back lot, and obviously the lakeside owner owns it, but it is not buildable. So from our township standpoint, we've already touched on when it comes to assessments, you need to justify that you're increasing somebody's property value more than you're assessing them. And if a person is not legally able to build on their property, it's kind of hard to say, especially a lot of those land use justifications apply to them because they can't build. They can't take advantage of it on that side of the property. So Nothing is set in stone, of course, but what we're working with right now is that is going to be a category that will exist, these non-buildable lots. Pretty much the criteria is going to be that you would have to have a single parcel. So these lots will have to be combined. Most of them already are. Maybe I shouldn't say most. Some of them already are. The others that aren't, they will have to be combined into a single parcel. And when that happens, that effectively is saying that this lot is never going to be split and sold again because they are too small to be split by our ordinance standards. We already touched on that number a little bit. That's 30,000 square feet is the area. That is the minimum that you need to split a lot. These are going to be smaller than that, so once they're combined, they can't be split off and sold anymore. And then, of course, we have that restriction in place that they also can't be built upon. The asterisk there is if for some reason down the road something changes, don't know exactly what that would be, and they do end up putting a structure on there that connects to the system. In our assessment list, it's going to be noted exactly what the assessment should have been, and they will pay a connection fee. We would call it a connection fee in lieu of assessment, so we would capture all of that money at that time. But in the meantime, if it never is built upon, as it looks legally like it is going to be the case, they will not be assessed up front here. So hopefully that helps shed some light on that Birchmont Court question. Then we have the board told us that in order to incorporate the township into its own city, all residents must connect to this wastewater system. And here the simple answer really is that incorporation is not contingent upon this project. It is something that everybody is aware that we have been working on over the past few years. And I think it's an obvious thing probably to most people that it would probably be an easier path forward if we had our own system. However, it has nothing that makes our incorporation contingent upon this project, this wastewater system. In 2020, there were 4,535 residents in Northern Township. Why are only 400 residents slated to hook up to this proposed system? And in here, I think it is definitely important to point out that the system is being designed in such a manner that it potentially could service many more residents. Feasibly, it could potentially serve almost the entire township. And then I've also touched a little bit on, depending on where things land, this is a modular type design where if you needed to expand and put another treatment facility, you can put it right next to the one that currently exists. And the parcel of land that we're looking at is substantial, so we should have plenty of room for all of the drain fields, backup drain fields, and expansion into the future. So then the reason why only the 400 are being slated to hook up right now, though, is because that's the money that we have is to put in the system around the lake. And we're going to start with the most sensitive high priority area in the township and then expand out should the opportunity arise down the road, but not necessarily. And this looks like it's my last one. So the feasibility study, somebody had asked, let us see, during one of our meetings that we had recently had, that the board had stated that the residents could go out and do one of their these feasibility reports at their own cost if they had concerns about ours. And then they go on to say that many were concerned that the engineering firm who prepared the report is also slated to receive almost $1.5 million for completing the rest of the engineering work on the study. And they said that they're confident that having a second feasibility study independently would alleviate some of these concerns. And here, there's a few things that I think are really important to point out. One is that Freeburg and Grund is our township's engineer of record. They have been that since 2010 and renew it. So the reason why we had them prepare the report is because they're the township's engineer, essentially. And that whole process to select them as the engineer of record went through a full request for qualifications process. Again, I think it was back in 2010. Then secondly, pointing out that there isn't really anything in state statute that any of us are aware of that says that our engineer of record can't prepare the feasibility reports and then also design the system after the fact. But I think the most important thing to point out here is that it does seem like the question has a little bit of confusion, and it very could well be that others have the same confusion, so this hopefully is helpful. In that what Mark prepared for us is a feasibility report. And I know people are using two words here kind of interchangeably, but maybe is where the confusion is coming in. This feasibility report versus a feasibility study. So the feasibility report that he prepared is looking at a specific proposed project and then answering those questions that he went through. The specific proposed project here is this wastewater treatment plant system that we're here talking about tonight. What it isn't is a feasibility study, if you want to call it that, where, or another one would be like that community action report that I had a reference that we did earlier in 2012, where you're looking at alternative analyses in different options and what might end up being the best option for your community. So that is stuff that we have done for decades. I showed you all the different things that have been done and all the conversations that have been had. But then again, just trying to clear up the confusion, the feasibility report is not that. It's not that big alternative analysis. It's just looking at the feasibility, answering those criteria specific to this proposed project. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark to go through a few of the more technical questions that we had. And then I think we're going to be ready to kick it out to everybody to answer questions. Am I doing good, Jess?
Yeah, good. Let's keep going.
And again, as Chris mentioned, for what he just went through there, a lot of these questions were generated by emails and other conversations. So they're not always in a question format. Some of them are in statement format, so bear with me on some of those awkward items. One question or one note was the feasibility report does not provide clear data on population density, future usage, or local phosphorus reduction benefits. Regarding population density, we talked earlier on that we have a number of substandard lots. So we know we have the density in these areas where we're looking at 72 to 75% of the parcels being 30,000 square feet or less. We have that population density that would drive something like this. Future usage is something that we account for in our design, trying to account for what we expect may be built out, what we may expect to be expanded, whether that's single family residential, parcels that are currently undeveloped, or some of the commercial usage, and then local phosphorus reduction benefits. The goal of this project is to treat this phosphorus that is in the water to a standard that's nearly double in most cases versus what an individual on-site septic system can treat. So we're pretty substantial there. The combination of that treatment process combined with moving the source away from surface waters and having controlled, monitor output will lead to a substantial improvement. We'll get into the next one here. Will there be actual monitoring of the aquifer? So now we're talking about groundwater, and we are required to follow all MPCA requirements for sampling, testing, and documentation, as well as likely having wells to monitor on the site. Now we're talking about the dispersal and treatment site here. Where I'm aware that the DNR has test wells within the Bemidji area, but none are close to the proposed treatment facility. Having the DNR place a test well close to this facility, in my opinion, would alleviate my and likely others' fears of aquifer contamination. As my answer is, as noted, our project will have test wells installed. DNR would be welcome to install wells as they see fit on or adjacent. I'd be interested in the flows. So we talked about the 120,000 gallons per day, which is currently what we're accounting for on the parcel. As a comparison, the city of Bemidji has a permit for 2.5 million gallons a day, utilizing approximately 900,000 gallons a day currently. So again, this project has a final build out of about 120,000 gallons a day. And just as a comparison's sake, for the adjacent city, they have, again, 2.5 million gallons per day permit with about 900,000 gallons a day used with their discharge to the surface water in the Mississippi between Urban and Bemidji. I have concerns regarding the environmental impact of this very large human waste treatment facility. To respond to that, I say this project's collection area has been determined by overlaying the shoreland protection zone of Lake Bemidji over the area within the township. This collection area is currently unmonitored and has the majority of systems aged beyond 25 years, of which there are approximately 75 of the 119. This being the case, the intent is to treat the entirety of this flow in a single monitored location and discharge treated effluent meeting MPCA and EPA standards. This distinction is key, as we are discharging only treated effluent, though not required depending on the dispersal method, and we're going underground versus distributing to the surface water. I'm concerned regarding the significant amount of liquid treated wastewater and the proposed drain field. Our analysis of the dispersal site by Bob Whitmire, professional scientist, and Mark Gothard, geotechnical engineer from Brown Intertech, indicates that soil and groundwater conditions are optimal for dispersal of treated effluent. The proposed system is thus far being based on soil loading rates substantially less than what is allowed for maximum aerial loading. The proposed system will be required to treat nitrogen to at least 10 milligrams per liter or less. Individual systems typically have capacity to treat only to approximately 50 to 60 milligrams per liter, far higher loadings than the proposed system will output. There's another question that came in from the same user recently regarding groundwater flows. There was a question regarding Big Bass Lake and what the groundwater flow direction would be or is. We have not researched that specifically. That is not something that is in our scope or requirements in order to get this system permitted. However, our looks at the geotechnical investigations on the treatment site, as well as the well indexes for many wells in the area, indicate that that groundwater flow is westerly and southerly from Big Bass Lake toward Lake Bemidji, and from that northern end of Lake Bemidji southerly to the Mississippi River. Another question, adding more and more harmful chemicals and nutrients such as phosphorus via leaching into our aquifer would likely play a detrimental effect on this process. The answer is phosphorus is a perfect example of how the proposed system will be an advantage to both surface waters and groundwater. Typically, properly constructed, properly functioning, not overloaded, and not beyond useful life on-site individual septic systems can treat wastewater for phosphorus to a level of approximately 5 to 10 milligrams per liter, removing approximately 10 to 30% from influent, depending on soil types and wastewater flows and characteristics. The proposed mechanical system will treat to a level of approximately 1 to 3 milligrams per liter, removing approximately 30 to 50% of influent. The substantially greater treatment removal capability, given the groundwater characteristics, flows you've noted, can have a massive reducing capacity versus the current condition to the overall groundwater in the affected area. Next question within that, will there be regular well monitoring? As I mentioned before, we are required to monitor around the site, the dispersal site. And the system permit will require groundwater monitoring at the property line. Finally, air quality is a big concern. Finally, air quality is also a major concern. Bass Lake is located only 1/2 mile north and east from this treatment facility, and in the summer we have predominantly southwest winds, which would likely negatively affect the air quality of the residents of our lake. The response to that is that this type of treatment, when compared to others such as pond systems, has much smaller setback requirements, largely due to the mechanical plant process having much lower potential to be malodorous. The setbacks are just 300 feet from property lines in this case, whereas a pond system has a setback from pond wall of 1/4 mile. As the mechanical plant is a continuous system, there's not the same turnover that could be seen in a pond system where we have an anaerobic condition. And when combined with two other factors, treated effluent discharge underground and that subsurface nature of that treated effluent, we have very, very little potential for any odor issues. Our typical siting looks at wind direction, as it did in this instance, from prevailing winds for our area is typically northwest, though there's a somewhat larger component of overnight winds in the late summer from the southwest component. I've attached the windrows. Work on. I'm very encouraged, this is a next comment, I'm very encouraged by the fact that there will be test wells on site for monitoring water quality. Will the results of this testing be readily available to the public? The results of MPCA required testing are available through MPCA. Also, what is the process for mediation if the well testing indicates unsafe, abnormal levels of detrimental chemicals or nutrients? And the answer to that is, if there is an exceedance of any permitted monitored levels, enforcement action is taken by the MPCA, and the treatment works would be reviewed for changes, additions that would be required or require implementation. More on the wind. I'm just trying not to duplicate any of the comments from the same one. Side. That is the extent of those, and I think we are back on to any questions from the public.
All right. All right, you guys, thank you for bearing with us. We're trying to get through a lot of stuff that has been, people have taken the time to write stuff in. We wanted to get through. Hopefully that answered a lot of questions up front. Like I said, appreciate the time waiting, but now I'm going to open it up. If you'd like to step forward, please address your questions to me, and well, I'll try to send it out to the right appropriate person. Just state your name and we'll go from there.
Michael Grallen, I live at 6109 Lavinia Road, and we'll probably be one of the users on the system. So, but I'd like to talk a little bit about a grant and talk about financing, okay? And Chris is, I think about 3 years ago, it was Chris and then you and I think Mark. Remember that we talked about, you know, different financing programs and grants and that for the system. And my question is, back when Chris and you called, you said you're hoping that we'll be able to connect to the city of Bemidji, you know, at that time with the MOU. Sure. And then in one of 26-23, then the House representatives from this area, they authored a $8 million grant, and that was from the Clean Water Fund. It was a grant for the sewer system. Now, can we reapply for that same grant or a different amount?
Yeah.
And I think Chris said it would be in 2026, right?
Okay, I can answer you. So if you're looking to see whether we're applying for additional grants, we are. We're currently working with the current state legislators, and because there wasn't a bonding bill again last year that was put forward. So we are right now working with our representatives to have a bill in that is already in that was, we testified last year. There wasn't a state bonding bill that was passed, but we met with them just last week again, and there will be another one that'll be submitted in again. Right now, hopefully, we feel like we have a strong case. We've had been awarded twice already from the federal government, and the state has been a little bit tougher just because they haven't been passing bonding bills every time like they normally do.
We look at this as $8 million, and you look at the EPA, which is 6, that's 14 million.
Yeah.
You know, so that would pretty much cover the, you know, the first phase of the project.
Just so you know that there's a phase 1 and a phase 2, and so we do recognize that that would probably be for the entire side of the lake than if we did something of that sort. So there's additional what that request is, and I'm not even sure what the additional one is right now. Is it 10 million we put in for right now with them recently?
Recently, we'll probably be putting in something more along the lines of 14 million. And yeah, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, just wanted to add to that. The very interesting thing from my personal perspective, as we've been working through this project, has been the amount and just the ease and quickness with which you'll find support on these organizational levels for a project like this. Lake Bemidji is on the Mississippi headwaters, and it's such a valuable natural resource for our region, for the state, for really the entire country, the Mississippi watershed. Anytime, as Jess mentioned, that we put in for grant requests before, we've had nothing but favorable responses, and it's really just unfortunate timing and bad luck in one sense that we don't have state funding right now. We were told that we were in state funding before, and then as Jess alluded to, yeah, we're definitely putting in for it again, probably about $14 million. And then I just wanted to stress the fact that we see such good support when it comes to like the state level, even to that. Fingers crossed, of course, I'm very hopeful that we will see success with it if they just pass a bonding bill.
If you take that 14 million plus the 6 million from that's the 20 million, and so that would take phase 1 and phase 2, right?
Any grant funding we get from here is only going to help pay for the costs and more assessments. We want more funding just as badly as you. And I think it's worth mentioning too that when we do get to the point where we know we have a bill that's submitted down at the state, we will certainly send that out to everybody, and it would be extremely helpful if people are reaching out to our local legislators. Bedell Duran is just one, you know, as our House representative up here, he's going to be taking our request forward, reaching out to them, reaching out to anybody really down there and just letting them know, fund this project. It goes a long ways when they see a lot of support.
I think we can support that, so we get support from the public then to be able to fund that, because then that would really help reduce the cost of the project. Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then one other question on funding. When did we meet Chris? Thursday, we met with a federal agency talking about funding for the project. And let's say they will actually combine their financing both with grants and other funding for the project. So we met on Thursday then on that. Yeah, and so we're going to have more meetings, and I think the township, you've done a lot of work to get the documents necessary to do an application for it, right? So that's coming up, that we're going to be working on that.
Yep.
And you look at those numbers, and they're actually maybe a little bit better than a regular general obligation bond funding with the interest rates and the terms and that, so.
If we can make it work, yep. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Support anybody else? Thank you. What's that?
So people that are listening in online can comment also.
We already said that what we're going to do is we're leaving it on mute so they can type in questions and they're going to take their questions afterwards. I guess if somebody needed to say something, I guess we'd ask that they maybe put something on there, but I haven't really saw it. I guess if there's questions being presented, I'll tell you.
There is, we'll adjust it.
So-
We have questions as it goes along here.
Sure, and so we've got stuff on here, so they're open to ask questions, but we're just trying to keep it so there's not a lot of interruption and a lot of noise. Thank you. Thank you.
Figured I should get up here and my daughter's singing in the background.
We like it.
All right, so my name is Brittany Ickle. You probably recognize me from some of the meetings earlier. I live at 6061 Big Bass Road Northeast, so directly south of where the plant's gonna be. It's more of a statement. Some of my questions have been answered a little bit, so I'll just kind of motor through. I want to start by expressing my support for Northern Township's efforts to improve wastewater infrastructure. This project is vital for protecting Lake Bemidji, and I commend the work that has gone into securing funding and engaging with residents to find solutions that work for everyone. It's not an easy job, it's not glamorous, I understand. That said, I do have concerns that remain about the proposed location of the mechanical package plant and its impact on nearby families like mine. My husband and I purchased our property and began to build our home in 2020. We had chosen Northern Township for its quiet rural character, the perfect place to raise our kids. We moved in on Thanksgiving Day of 2021. We love living near the state park, the bike trail, and several lakes. Our decision to build here was a significant investment in our family's future. So imagine our surprise and frustration this April after we learned a wastewater treatment plant was being planned right next door to us. At the resident meeting in May, we were told the proposed plant would be designed to handle the 120,000 gallons a day capacity, a scale more typical of urban areas than rural communities. When we inquired about similar sized systems in the state, I think actually Brian from Bar Engineering over here was there. The consulting engineer gave East Los Angeles as an example. For a community of our size, it's hard not to feel like we're guinea pigs a little bit here with this size of a facility. While I appreciate the additional details from the feasibility study, now what's online, is that the full study or is that the synopsis that you read?
It's the full
Because I
study.
read the full thing online
Yeah.
and I didn't see a lot about the plant, so that's kind of what's triggering this. Some key concerns remain unaddressed. First, using the membrane bioreactor technology and a subsurface soil treatment system is a promising modern method. I know there's, limited odors and seepage and noise. There's just no specific plan outlined for managing any noise and odor that does come about from here. I mean, there's always a potential plant failure, anything like that. Statements from prior meetings have been inconsistent, one downplaying any impacts and another comparing it to Bemidji's plant, which is known for its odors. Second, the feasibility study confirms the land's suitability for wastewater treatment. I mean, it's all sand that filters. But it doesn't explain how nearby wells will be protected from spills or failures. And now I've heard MPCA, a lot of them, they govern a lot of that. Since Northern Township does not have municipal water services, well contamination could be devastating. With anticipated future expansion of this system that I know we're really excited about, but it just makes me nervous the more you guys go on about it, because we're right there. There's no mention of monitoring programs, which you have mentioned now, so contingency plans or protections for neighboring households. Because we have young children, as you can hear her back there, and my son is almost 4. We already regularly test our well for nitrates, because that was, we had infants, nitrates are bad for them. Lastly, the study doesn't address the quality of life impacts on the 11 households closest to the site, including ours. A comprehensive environmental impact study could provide clarity about these risks and help ensure all concerns are addressed. Transparency about how the plant will affect nearby families is critical for building trust. I'm urging the township to provide detailed plans for mitigating noise and odor concerns, protecting private wells, and addressing any operational risks. Conducting an environmental impact study would be a reasonable next step to ensure this project benefits the entire community while safeguarding the health and quality of life of residents near the proposed site. Thank you for listening, and I hope these concerns are considered as this project continues to move forward.
Thank you for comments. Mark, do you have anything you can answer right now, or does we need to do some research out to give her some answers?
No, I think there's some items that we should put out there right away, actually. Thank you for the comments, and thank you for coming again, as you were present early on. One of the first notes that you had mentioned was that the plant is not in the study. A key distinction that I make is that, again, we're only assessing for the collection system, and it's a feasibility report, not a study. So the collection system is what needs to be analyzed versus what you're being, well, not you, what people are being assessed for. The folks that are in here in phase one would be assessed for. So that's the first distinction. Regarding well contamination, one of the key points of this project altogether is that because we are likely in the same aquifer, and I may go to Bob on this for a second as well, but because we're all likely in that same aquifer, the idea is that we're treating it, period. And so that you're very likely in the same aquifer as where all the collection system is now. So we're not introducing something from one aquifer into another aquifer, and treating and monitoring it. Regarding the EIS, I think we might have Ben talked about that, but we do have a full federal environmental required for this project. As part of the EPA funding. We are required to meet all NEPA requirements, which is the federal entity, or federal law, excuse me. You addressed some of those items that show up in the questions and comments regarding odor. Regarding noise, it's not a noise generating operation, so that is contained. So other than vehicles.
It's all attenuated and everything.
Yeah, so other than vehicles coming in and out, but other than that, no.
Obviously, the initial construction will be.
Right.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
So again, if I could, I would like to go to Bob if I could. I don't know if we can get all the way down there though. And or Ben, just regarding it's a good opportunity for everybody to hear what the environmental requirements are. We're fortunate in this project actually that because we do have the EPA, the Environmental Protection Federal Agency funding involved, that we have to meet all those federal requirements. Whereas if the township were to take this on, or if the city were to take this on with just their own dollars, they would not have to meet these requirements. So it's advantageous to us as residents here that we have this level of involvement. Does that answer those questions, at least to some degree there?
Yep, as much as they can be. Yeah.
Okay, I'll pass this to Bob again here.
So one of, so one of the things that you did mention was the nitrates, and that is an issue with subsurface dispersal. This system will have the monitoring wells for that. And one of the things that you should know in terms of the package plant is it's going to reduce the amount of nitrogen that's going to be going into the ground by 40 to 50% of just the normal septics. So there's going to be quite a bit of additional treatment with that in that regard. On top of that, MPCA also requires a mitigation plan if you start to get close to any of the action numbers. And so that will be something that will be done in advance. So nitrogen can be further reduced if necessary with the product. So.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Maybe I can talk a little bit about the mechanical treatment.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah,
I think the board will go that far.
Will it? Okay.
Just get it
I
past
don't think the mic will go past that, so.
Yep, it'll go.
Hi, Brittany, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Brian.
So you mentioned the concern with nitrates, and the groundwater standard is 10 milligrams per liter. What we will be discharging from the package plant will be no greater than 10 milligrams per liter. That's going to be a treatment standard that the MPCA requires in order to put the treated effluent into the drain field. Now, there's some additional treatment within the drain field. So what gets to groundwater will be considerably less than that drinking water standard that MPCA has. I wanted to, you mentioned East LA.
Yep.
And a little bit out of context, but that was a treatment system that we worked with the county on for injecting treated wastewater effluent into a drinking water aquifer. That's the only reason that I mentioned it at that meeting. So it has some applicability here because the wastewater that's treated in the mechanical plant. I'd rather use the term mechanical plant until we know what type of treatment system it'll be.
Sure.
But that will be treated water that then goes to a drain field. And the drain field is our discharge point, which does go into the surface water aquifer, the surface aquifer.
Yeah, so my understanding is it's essentially a large septic system.
Well,
No.
It's actually not. A septic system typically consists of 2 tanks, concrete or plastic construction. Water flows in at one end and everything else that's in the water. And some of it settles and some of it doesn't, and it flows out. And what you get going to the drain field is water that has had most of the solids removed, but not really very much of anything else. This will be more of a mechanical wastewater treatment system, so there will be microbes that are maintained in the water to treat the organic waste that comes in. Those will be settled, and the clarified effluent will go out from there. There's other things that potentially could be added to the treatment if they were needed. I don't anticipate that they'll be needed because it's possible to treat for ammonia, for nitrate, and for phosphorus using biological wastewater treatment.
Sure.
And that occurs to a small extent in septic tanks, but a mechanical system gives an operator much greater control. Now here's something that hasn't been mentioned previously, but the biggest difference between a mechanical wastewater plant and a septic system isn't the concrete or the pipes or the motors, it's the person who operates it.
Sure.
A septic treatment system, the homeowner is the operator. And judging from how often I remember to change my air conditioner filter, most of us don't really do as well as we might. An operator is a licensed professional. They have to pass classes, they have to meet training requirements. They go to MPCA courses on an annual basis to update their training. And our operator that is required for this system is going to be somebody who knows something about mechanical wastewater treatment plant, sampling and monitoring, and completing discharge monitoring reports, which they'll be required to do on a monthly basis.
Sure.
And those are public documents, they're public information. And if there's ever an issue, then there is a process in place to figure out what caused that issue and how can we make it better.
I just want to clarify the earlier meeting when you gave the answer about the East Los Angeles plant. It was in response to my question, is there a similar sized plant like this in the state of Minnesota or nearby states? More or less so we could visit it and kind of see it ourselves. That was the initial question from back this May.
If that was my answer, that was a
It
really
wandered
poor
over to East
answer.
Los Angeles and I got real nervous.
I think that we don't have to pass the mic. I think the original one was when had the option as well for a package plant.
Yep.
Versus what Brian's talking about, there's a fairly good chance that what we end up with is an actual on-site constructed mechanical system that would be no different than, say, City of Bemidji. Should say no different because they all have different elements into them, and that one's discharging to the surface water. But yes, it'd be very, very similar.
All right.
Okay.
In scope.
All right, thank you, appreciate it. Anybody else, please come forward.
They can't write in any, there's 27 people
Okay.
that are
Just explain that we're gonna do it at the end again.
So can we see questions out of it there?
Yeah, but we're gonna take them out.
We're gonna do the questions from them after. They can't take them in? Okay, I gotcha. All right, I get you what you're saying. All right, thank you. Take a look at it.
There's a few in here.
We already have a bunch of questions on here, suppose I'm not sure what's going on because we're seeing the questions, but if you have a name, we can do some, unmute people later on. All right, go ahead, please.
Lisa Boulay, Lavinia Road. I have several concerns about these. One is, I live in a 700 square foot house by myself, very conservative on any water I use, and I will be paying the same fee for sewage or whatever as somebody who has a large house with many family members. And I'm probably still using less than a lot of the summer folks will who will be having up. There needs to be some way to make this assessment fair. I don't mind paying my fair share, but I don't want to be, I wish some other people would pay their fair share who have a number of people living in the houses. Then another concern is you say it's going to increase the value of my home. It doesn't matter if my value of my house goes up. All it does is increase my taxes. So it's giving you an excuse. It's like there's not even much. You've been out, you know, to, I think you've been out to probably my house. And even if I didn't have this new, even with the new septic, there's not room for me to build. I'm all in favor of a clean lake, but everybody needs to contribute. Like people want to come here and they're concerned about it. You don't need to be concerned about it if you're not paying for it. You know, I just want this to be equitable and affordable. It would be cheaper for me to put in a holding tank. And you say this system will last like 100 years. I'm probably not going to be around in 100 years. I'm going to live till at least 93, but after that, this needs to be an affordable. And when you had it asked people if they wanted it, the people who were voting were people who didn't even live in the containment zone that's going to be required to get this. They shouldn't have had a right to vote. Aren't we concerned about the health of Lake Mobile? Let's make them go in on this.
I appreciate it. I think, I don't, Mark, Chris, I don't know if you wanted to respond to anything from this.
Yeah, just try to clear up a couple points of confusion, maybe the last one, because it's fresh in my mind. You mentioned a vote, and I think we might be conflating a couple different meetings. So
Yeah.
we have had a vote on whether people wanted to annex.
Yeah.
Or do the annexation plan,
Yeah.
say the city of Bemidji. We've also had a meeting where we talked with the residents about incorporating.
Yeah.
And we definitely took, we'll call it an informal vote, because that doesn't technically
Yeah.
need a vote either. But there isn't any meeting where we've had a vote on this project,
Yeah,
nor
but
is there
you
any
were
that we
asking people
know about.
if they wanted to be annexed.
Okay,
And
yeah.
if people wanted to be annexed, and they should have just asked the people who are going to be affected. There's people
Okay.
said they don't want to be annexed, but they're not paying in this.
Well, to be fair, I'll say, I appreciate your questions and comments, and I will say, I know that Chris and I think maybe Mark too, they've worked with you a little bit trying to, we've
Yeah.
changed some formulas just to try to accommodate for things. We are looking at people for deferrals and stuff, if there's needs and hardships and stuff. We are open to try to work with people to help for the situations where there's, so there's no part of anything that we have anything written in stone. We appreciate the comments, we appreciate the concerns you have, and we're gonna try to do it what we can, and we're trying to figure out how we can address the assessments, how we can possibly, if we have to defer them for a time frame until, like, for example, we've talked about the possibility, maybe deferring them for when there's hardships until a land exchange or some sort, or something of that sort. So those things we are trying to deal with. We don't have anything, like I said, set in stone. We realize there is unique situations that we are aware of, and we're going to try to do the best we can to help individuals who are not going to be put into a hardship situation.
So then people who are out in phase 2, they're going to get longer to have to hook up than the people in phase 1.
Phase 2 is not being assessed up front. That's not being assessed when we put a project in. So until we put pipe in the ground. So just because we're talking about a phase 1 and a phase 2, there's no part of the assessments right now that when we do this first phase from basically talking about right now from the landing on the backside of Lake Bemidji around, the phase 2 portion is not what we're assessing right now. That wouldn't be assessed until that project was completed.
So they could end up not having to ever get this project.
Well, I don't think that's our intent, what we're working for, but I mean, that's, if decided that some came up where we never did it again, then if they never had services, then they wouldn't be assessed. So I guess I don't really have much else I can say
Wouldn't
with
it
that.
make more sense to just put them all in and make everybody go into it?
Well, we don't want to sit there and spend $20-some million right now. We have to do what there's funding for right now, and we have to do what we can at a time and try to make it so the residents are not being, we could do that and then try to assess it a larger amount, but we don't want to do that. We're trying to assess a small amount as we can, so it makes it as affordable as possible for for people and when we have grant funding available. Anybody else want to answer anything that I'm not missing?
Can I
Go ahead.
say
Yep.
another thing
Yep.
too? Just quickly back to the annexation thing again, just to point out for everybody's sake too, that I understand what you're saying now and I appreciate that clarification. That certainly would be something that we'd want to do if that was like the path we were going down. Is we'd want to talk to all those affected people and really find out exactly what they want as well. Everybody was invited to that meeting, but definitely want to point out that annexation is an issue that affects the entire township, and that's why we asked the entire township. If a portion of it leaves, that has bearing on what can happen in the rest of the township. Plus, as we've discussed, like the entire township has been requested before to just merge, which is essentially a large annexation. And then the other one too is just actually back to the first comment that you had made about being fair and equitable and stuff. And I just really want to caution again to make the distinction between assessments, which is how we cover the cost of putting in the pipes, and that is being covered by a formula, which we are applying equitably in the same manner to everybody. And as Jess pointed out, with irregular shaped lots, we've had to look at that again and found a way that makes it work, because before, as we previously talked about.
And I think that you did a good job on.
And I appreciate that.
I'm talking about the $54 a month
Perfect,
fee.
the monthly fee.
The
And I just want to
people
make sure
use
those are
more
kept
should
separate.
pay more.
Yeah, and some of these guys over here might actually be able to speak to it a little bit better, but our understanding is that at the end of the day, there's not a gigantic difference when you're talking about individual houses and what you'd actually see like in a bill from somebody flushing the toilet a few more times and somebody not flushing the toilet a few times. I don't know, Mark, would you have a better way of putting it?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
They're
We'll have to
relatively
move on
similar.
after this.
Those polls are relatively similar, and even in municipalities where you have a base charge plus a usage charge.
Can you show me that data?
Well, you
Can
could
you
look
send
at,
that to me?
you could look at the city of Bemidji, for instance, but you have to, I don't live in the city of Bemidji, so you have to
Neither
look at
do
their
I.
data. So you'd have to look at some of their data. But what you'll see is they have a flat charge plus a usage charge, but the bulk of that charge is typically the flat charge. I want to make sure we address any of your questions, but I do have to go back to Brittany as well, because I cut off on the environmental. So.
All right, we'll let other people talk and we'll come back if we have more questions. So if you want to be quick before we.
I do.
Something.
Ben, would you talk just briefly about the environmental side?
Sorry about that, Brittany. So to answer Brittany's question about the environmental process or impact assessment for this project, since there is federal money involved from the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, under the National Environmental Policy Act, federal law signed into statute in 1970. Anytime you have federal funding, permits, approvals, that agency has a responsibility under NEPA to conduct a review and an overview and a process. So for this project, the scale and size of it is going to fall into the environmental assessment category. There's 3 categories of review under NEPA, and that is the middle one, the environmental assessment. And it doesn't just look at specific aspects of the project that have been discussed so far here, like groundwater protection, drinking water, nitrates, those very specifics to wastewater treatment. It looks at a broad scale of environmental considerations, including drinking water, air quality, there's environmental justice considerations, floodplains, wetlands, threatened endangered species, wildlife habitats, geology, soils. It's kind of a comprehensive synthesis of a lot of the studies that have been individually done, engineering and otherwise, for this project. It looks at it overall broadly, what are the environmental impacts, and there's a decision made by the EPA after they review this document. And ultimately, the outcome that I think the township and everybody would hope to see out of this project is you reach a finding of no significant impact. So once the EPA looks at this document, they will have to make that determination one way or another. And once that's done, that kind of determines the path forward. The environmental assessment itself is also available for public comment. Once the document is complete, there's an opportunity again there for public engagement and comment. So does that help explain that or answer your question a little bit?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I know I don't want to get too late and stuff too for anybody. So I'd like to keep under 2 minutes if you can for questions, and we'll try to move forward. I know there's a lot of online questions too. So yeah, I appreciate anybody who wants. I want to give everybody an opportunity if they want to speak. So thank you.
My name is Paul Welling. Thanks for having this meeting. Thank you. 6507 Lavinia. I'd like to point out just a few things that haven't been covered, and then I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Number one, in Lavinia, we have 62 properties that are parcels that are going to be assessed from Lake Bemidji State Park down to Lavinia Boat Landing. 14 of those are year-round, so 48 of them are seasonal. Okay, that's 78%. I could go along about, I'm gonna say the average time that they spend in Bemidji is about 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, that's point number one. Second point in the feasibility study, the two citations that you have that deal with specifically with septic systems, they really highlight the importance of how much loading is going on, meaning how much water is going into the tank and of course the drain field. The examples that they use, one is a 4-person year-round study. It was done in Ontario, Canada. Another one was a village that was in Massachusetts, and it's a year-round place, and they use the census data, average 2.86 people, and of course they live there year-round. Okay, point number two. So this question about the lifetime of the septic system, you're not really taking these things into consideration when you say that 50% of them might, believe your data, that they're, as such and such an age. The problem is when you read this stuff, the actual effective age of these septic systems is quite a bit lower than that. Okay, so if you're only using it for 2 months a year, you divide this 30 by 6, and you're talking about effective age of 5 years. Okay, I realize this is your concern. Third point, we talk about phosphorus in the lake. It's in your project study. Number one, I guess it wasn't on your screen here. There was actually a study done by the Environmental Protection Agency back in 1974, identified less than 1% of the phosphorus in Lake Bemidji was done by the septic treatment, by the septic systems. Okay, we all know that Lake Irving is very contaminated. The MPCA says they want to see 30 or less parts per million of phosphorus. And Lake Irving is like 63. And so we know that there's so much phosphorus coming into Lake Bemidji, and that was in the 2016 study that MPCA did. But again, the status of the phosphorus now, the last 4 years have been 14, 12, 11, 13, so less than half of what the MPCA recommends, and we attribute that to these zebra mussels that have supposedly encapsulated the phosphorus. And I guess as part of the project study, we're saying that once they reach carrying capacity, I guess we're calling it, somehow that the phosphorus is going to be released. Okay, so that brings me to my question. Is there any lakes in the state of Minnesota where that's happened, that zebra mussels have reached a carrying capacity, where they've released phosphorus? Can you cite a lake where that's happened? Anybody?
That's outside of my area of expertise.
I cannot.
Lake Pepin would be an example.
Okay, do you have a study of that? I'd like to see it.
I don't have that study, but they've been in there quite a lot longer, and they reached a peak, and then they kind of collapsed in that system.
Because I've seen them going up and down. They've been in Cass Lake for a number of years, and of course some die off. Their lifespan is there, and of course the ones that are reborn, and then they absorb the nutrients. So I'd really like to see that, but I guess I don't see that in any of the data that we've had.
I don't have that at my disposal right now.
Is there an author of that you can cite? Or?
I don't.
Some of these things we'll have to get back to you guys on, but we hear what you're saying. It's up in, I guess, I don't know, anybody else have anything they want to comment on with?
I guess the only other question I've got is, do we have any information to show that what the septic systems are contributing to phosphorus in the lake, other than what the EPA did in 1974, where they attributed less than 1%?
Is there anybody who wants to speak to how this is looked at?
From my standpoint, we're just looking at the generalization of septic systems having phosphorus in them and contributing to groundwater and surface water flows.
Sure.
So we need to generalize because we don't have monitoring wells at each site, for instance. But if somebody else, I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to that, but I think we're not aware of anything that's been monitored specifically at each site.
Okay, because I think that's one thing. We invited Sarah Hager up here. She's a professor at the University of Minnesota,
yeah.
And they do actual studies, and so we could determine really what is the results. I don't know. Do you guys familiar with Sarah Hager?
Never heard of her.
Okay, she's a professor at the University of Minnesota, specializes in SSTS, as they call it, subsurface septic treatment system.
We do probably have to move on shortly too. So.
I look forward to that.
Did somebody else want to respond to anything else with that or not? I don't know what else to say.
Hello, my name is Guy Sweeney. I live at 2635 Pearl Drive Northeast. I don't live on the lake, but I obviously live in Northern Township. I just want to draw everyone's attention to the map in front of us, Northern Township. What I understand, maybe not since construction has gone down, but for a large part of the time I've lived here, 1 in 3 building permits in the entire county of Beltrami County occur in our township. We can see why. We have the northern part of the lake, the most beautiful part of the lake, and easy access into the city of Bemidji. And we enjoy rural recreation and city life all together. The lake is an important asset, and we, as a community, have not always been good stewards. We had a sawmill that contributed a lot of pollution, and we all paid a cost to clean up that pollution as citizens of Beltrami County. We had a landfill that leaked, and now there's a bloom that impacts Lake Bemidji, and as citizens, we all had to pay for the cost of that impact on our environment. I appreciate all the work that this board is doing to get ahead of a future problem with the amount of growth and human livelihood that lives in Northern Township. That is going to impact our lake, whether it's through phosphorus or other things. So having a wastewater treatment plant is forward thinking, and I support that action. And I look forward to the time that I could, hook up when this project, continues in the future. So I just wanted to make that comment that, the annexation issue is big. There is a reason that Bemidji would come north to annex. And, I enjoy that the amount of attention and energy that you guys are putting into a forward-thinking project. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or anything to say? If not, I'll entertain anybody else would like to come forward.
Hello, I'm Jim August. I live at 50010 Oakdale Lane Northeast. That's in the phase 2 part. I'm having a few questions. Do any of the township board members live on Lake Bemidji? Raise your hand. None? Is it accurate that the board members represent their constituents? Is that an accurate statement?
Yep.
So if the majority of the constituents say no to the project, how come the township board is so adamant in saying it's going to happen?
I guess I'm not aware of I understand I respect your opinion on this, but as I think Chris alluded to earlier, not everybody's here who's supportive of this. We have numerous people who come forward who have signed petitions, who have signed different areas and said that they were not in favor of something, and then they came back and we've talked to them later and they are in favor of it. I don't think, we're not trying to harm anybody. We're trying to do what we see an opportunity to take care of this, and it seems to me that we're trying to represent our constituents the best we can, protect our tax base the best we can, do what we think is right for our environment, do what's right for our people. We understand that everybody's going to agree, but we don't have the opinion, I guess, that it's the majority are against this. I mean, we know there's a loud some that are, and we're not even saying that there's not a good chunk that are against it, but we do recognize, and I hope you folks recognize, there is a strong support for this project too, of people who are going to be affected by this. And just because they're not coming to your door and knocking on it saying, vote for this or do this, doesn't mean there's not that majority out there. That's all I can say. Does anybody else want to say anything? I mean, from what we've been through?
So you haven't even taken a vote. It sounds like you're going by anecdotal information to what's supportive or not. I mean, I've been to a meeting with Lavinia this summer, and there were 4 hands that were going up in favor out of the 100 people that were there. I was at the county fairgrounds meeting, and I was there, and there were 2 hands that were up in favor.
I don't know if that's accurate, but about who was in favor of this project, so we didn't ask. The town board never asked that question that was asked by a resident, and it wasn't asked for a question of in favor of this project, it was asked for a question of annexation.
Yes.
So I think you're talking different things. So again, I think Chris already said that, but I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate and understand that you're not in favor of this, but like I said, we're doing what we can to protect our environment, our community. what we see for areas here. We're trying to do it with as minimal cost as we can. We're asking for grant dollars as much as we can. We continue to do that. I guess that's all I can say. I mean, like I said, I wish I could make everybody happy, but I know we can't.
Right. So one last thing is then, since you haven't even completed a formal survey of those in favor or not, what's the obstacle to having that done? To let the constituents decide and not the board members on our behalf.
I guess I don't know what to say other than we just need to move forward with the project after we've been going through this for a long period of time now.
Right.
So I guess I'm not really sure.
Michael.
You want to say something, Mike?
Thanks, Mr. Ockes.
You want to say something? Yeah, use this mic.
With most municipal projects, there's going to be people that are affected more than the other people. It's quite obvious in this process that those that are affected most will have the strongest opinion. But when it comes to who do we represent as a town board, we're members at large. We represent the whole township. When it comes to a popularity contest on a particular project, whether it be a road, expansion of the cemetery, whatever the case might be, there's people that are going to be more affected than others. But it doesn't mean by any means that it's not the best thing for the whole. I'm not affected per se because I don't live on Lake Bemidji, but I am affected as a township resident because the township is supplementing this project to a great extent. So to think that all the townships not paying any of these bills, we're looking at north of $1 million that we're going to contribute from general revenue or from our road fund. So, you know, there is a buy-in from everybody. And who makes the decision? It can't be a popularity contest. When you elected officials, they do the best they can. And if, you know, people aren't happy with it, there's an easy out. And that's to run for office and get rid of us. So that's the best I got for you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Mike. Thank you, sir. Oops.
All
right.
Jess.
Sure.
Brian's got something to add back there.
Okay, go ahead. Yes, Brian.
I'm Brian Grund with Freeburg & Grund. I just want to add one thing because I've been touched on directly.
Yeah, if you could, so people can hear you.
I'm Brian Grund with Freeburg & Grund. I just wanted to add one thing because it's been talked about substantially in the numbers. When you talk about who's in favor of the project and who's not, the question I would ask you is 70% of you have failing septic systems. You probably don't know it. And that's the problem. I've done countless projects like this in the past, is most people don't know their system is failing, okay? So how would your perspective change if they came out and looked at your system and found your system is non-compliant? Now you have to replace your system to the tune of $15,000 to $30,000, and you don't have the benefit of that being monitored in the future. And that's one of the driving forces behind this, is that most of you don't realize it, but most of you have failing septic systems. So there's tons and tons of data put out. I don't know about your septic system. No, it's been stated several times. That's not true. If your system is 25 years old, that is the average life expectancy of a septic system. Functioning septic system. That doesn't mean it won't take the water. That's data that's provided by the University of Minnesota and the NPCA. That's readily available information. So the problem is if, and this has happened in Hubbard County, the county goes out and inspects everybody's system on the lake. And they have lakes that have replaced, and over 90% of the people on the lake who thought their systems were compliant all had to replace their septic systems because they were non-compliant. So I have a septic system. And you know, even if you take good care of your septic system.
How old is your septic system?
My septic system, about 15 years.
Okay, well, you've had a while.
So, but I understand the concern. I've heard this comment countless times over the years. The fact of the matter is most people don't know that your system is non-compliant.
Sounds like testing is the evidence, though. I think people here are looking for evidence.
Test people's septic systems, and if they're not fine, make them fix them. Don't make everybody fix the whole problem. Or don't make a certain amount.
Please, all right, please. Okay, you had a chance, Kate.
Anyway.
Thank you.
I wanted to
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Anybody, please come forward if anybody else wants to keep talking. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rod Skoy. I live at 1230 Birchmont Beach Road, Northeast, and I want to compliment you guys for your meeting tonight. You've presented a lot of information. I really have always been supportive of what you're trying to do. I was one of the few people who raised their hands in 2021 at that meeting that I was supportive of this. So don't get this wrong. What I'm saying is in support.
Okay.
And I don't want to continue to bring this up, but I just want to say to folks that when I look at this region and we have a perfectly good functioning sewage treatment plant that the city of Bemidji is operating that's being utilized about 40% now, it doesn't make sense to me to build another one on the other side of the lake. And I know you guys have tried to work with the city, but I want to say publicly that I would hope that people would talk to the city about how much common sense that would be if you could hook up to what the city already has. And I've done a little checking on the flexibility in these congressional directed spending programs. And you guys have quite a bit of flexibility as to how you could use that money. You could use it to try to convince the city that it would be good for their long-term benefit to have more sewage going through their plants so they could defer their costs. You could use the money to help reduce the costs of all the people who are going to connect. You could actually maybe phase in Lavinia, which would take some of the distress out of the room that I've been listening to, and to the lady here who is going to live next door, it would certainly alleviate her problem. But when I hope you guys get this figured out, and I know you're working hard on it, but it would be nice to think that these two governments, Northern Township and the city of Bemidji, could work together to solve a regional problem with what we already have, instead of building another plant. But thank you for all your work.
Thank you. I don't know what, I mean, all I can say to that, you guys, is I guess is the meetings, we've had them over and over again. We've tried to look for common ground, and there's just, at some point, we have to make a decision and move on. I mean, we know what the residents here want, and we have funding that's available from the state to do County Road 20 and to make this so we can keep the cost down. This is what we have to move on at some point. And so I appreciate it. I understand the sentiment. I can't argue a bit, but it's just, it's like I said, at some point we have to make a decision and move forward.
Yes, do you want to mention that you did, after Rod brought it up the last time?
We've had recent conversations.
Yeah, but not successful.
No, it's not. Yeah.
I can say as an attorney in this community who knows the city attorney, their position is very firm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else who wants to come and speak? Else we can try to answer some questions online. Go ahead. If anybody else, are you guys okay if we do some online questions? Okay. If there's anybody, Jill, do you know somebody who's online who can't ask a question?
There's still some people that can't get off, but evidently there's been some questions, but interesting who can't get.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
We've been accepting everybody on as there's people in there. We keep accepting.
25.
There's 25 or 27.
25 people on it.
Yep.
Okay, so then it looks like at the bottom here is the older question, so I'll start there. So we have, why are the setbacks changing for the lake properties based on this sewer system? Setbacks are for lake and shoreline preservation. The septic on a lower setback footage can still be pushed back to keep it away from the lake. How does the change in setbacks have anything to do with waste? Wouldn't lowering the setbacks allow for more room from septic systems away from the lake? And if so, why weren't setbacks lowered earlier to ease the issue? This is a really good question. Those setbacks are based off of what has been recommended to the state, the Pacific Water Board, from, I believe, the DNR. And so when you have a zoning ordinance like we do in place, it's going to break it down into two categories. One is unsewered and one is sewered. As I mentioned before, set by the Mississippi Waters Board, which has purview in our area here. If you're on an unsewered property, it's 100-foot setback. Once it becomes a, I was saying that wrong, aren't you? No, unsewered property, 100-foot setback. If it becomes sewered on a municipal system, then it goes down to 50 feet. So we have no authority to change that right now. That just is set at a state level, and especially us being inside of the Mississippi Headwaters region. And then again, it's a benefit though, of course, and just something that we have to follow those higher authorities with. Next, we have the city of Bemidji offered to allow Northern Township to connect to their system without annexation, but then rescinded that offer once the township had received a significant federal grant to do so. It seems obvious that the city has annexation of Northern Township as a long-term goal. Is it the judgment of the board that if Northern Township does nothing at all, that the city of Bemidji will pursue a forced annexation strategy? Does anybody in particular want to speak to it?
Do you want to answer that, or do you want, Mike? You want to, I mean, to try. We're not basing a decision here on annexation only, but we are basing the decision that if we are going to invest in our infrastructure and invest on the roads in our community and do what we think for planning and zoning for the future, that we have to protect our borders. We can't keep throwing money from all of our taxpayers towards something and not set up a finite boundaries of what our township is and what we can afford in the future. So we expect that that's a service that the residents need and have been wanting in this area. I know not all of you, but enough people have said it and enough people have requested it from the city that we know that if we don't do it, the city's going to. And from what we heard from you folks back in 2021 was that you wanted us to do something to protect annexation from the future. This is one of the ways to help with it, to do those things. And it's also to offer a service that we know is needed from certain residents and certain businesses in the community. That's all I really can say. You guys have anything they want to add? Yes, okay, go ahead.
What assurances will you provide that the landscape of Lavinia Road will not change? Example, road width, tree removal. Do you have somebody in mind you wanted to answer?
I think Mark's got to answer that, don't you, Mark?
Okay, so for Lavinia Road, the intention is to take up the existing surface and put the same surface back down. We have a relatively narrow corridor with right-of-ways ranging from 40 to 80 feet through the extent of that 1 mile of Lavinia from Beach Lane up to the termination where it's dead-ended now. There will be some sporadic tree removal only within the right-of-way. There would be no tree removal on private property. We've talked to a few of you about that specifically. But again, those rights-of-way that the township has do vary through there. There's only one small segment where it's only 40 feet. A large predominance of it is 60 and 60 feet. Some is 70 and some is 80 feet wide. So where you perceive maybe that road driving surface being 20 to 22 feet wide, that road driving surface width would be the same in bituminous afterwards. There would be no widening. There would be no curb and gutter. There would be no storm sewer. There would be no ditching. We just don't have that opportunity there. It really is a take up and put back in place. Does that answer the extent of that question?
To the best we can.
Okay.
All right, so then the other one that we have in here is, it was stated earlier in the year by the board, taxes wouldn't go up due to this project. It's true the taxes didn't go up monetarily except for a normal tax increase. However, you are now deciding to take tax money from elsewhere, roads, to pay for it. So in essence, you are taking our taxes to pay for the project. Why did the board decide to take our taxes to pay for a project that only benefits 119 houses and some large entities?
Do you want to answer that, or is it, again, do you want to try to answer it, or do you want me to, Mike, or?
I'll tackle it.
Sure. Appreciate it, thank you. I didn't turn it on yet either.
This was,
It's up on the top there. Slide the little button.
Way up high.
There you go.
this was a controversial thing at the board level. It went to much debate, and the basic, how we ended up with the idea that road monies general road monies from the township should be used to offset part of this project is pretty simple when we got down to it. And I was the biggest dissenter. because I felt that, you know, this should be borne by the project. The road wouldn't be torn up if it wasn't for the project. Well, really, in truth, there is several areas of that road and other roads in the township that have benefited by projects that have been paid for by the township. Now, I want to go back to Bemidji, or to Birchmont Drive. Beltrami County paid the portion for Birchmont, for reconstruction of Birchmont when Birchmont Drive was done. So there is, you know, there's that precedence, but we felt as a town board, we came to the consensus that residents in that area, especially Lavinia and Wavell, we haven't done a lot of road improvements over there. We haven't done a lot for those residents over in that area when it comes to maintenance. So we really feel that, you know, these are not road projects that we would probably jump in and do right now. We had some other projects, but as we went through the whole thing, this is a way of spreading the cost out, lowering the assessment, if you will, but it does put the responsibility on all the residents of the township. So in the end, it's a matter of justifying the fact that the people over in that area, you know, deserve some consideration for their roads. That's it.
Can I just add one thing? Thanks, Mr. Chair. And then the other thing too that I would just like to point out is that this project, while yes, it's 119 people, whatever the number actually is, that would be hooking up initially. This really is something that's supposed to serve and benefit the entire community at large. Many different ways. One is just, like I had mentioned, the option to expand it in the future to more people in the township. Having that type of a system of this size allows us to do something like that. So, you know, from that standpoint, you definitely have to look at it as an investment in Northern Township's future. But this project, in more than one way, I really think has a way to shape the future for the township in a dramatically positive way, and will set us up to hopefully be a just strong community going into the future, and hopefully not shrinking, losing parts of our township, or having environmental problems down the road. This is forward thinking, investing in the community at large, and hopefully people will see that it is a benefit to everyone.
And I'll just add one more quick thing and then move on. But it generally, like when we've done, like say a couple years ago, we did Aspen Avenue over on the other side of, up by Whiting Road in that area. Those roads we don't assess. We don't, when they're being paved, they're township roads already, or when we're repaving something that's already there. Once they've been paved and once they've been accepted by the township, the residents don't pay for those. Like Deer Path, for example, a few years ago, that road was being taken over by the township. The residents paid almost the large majority of that project out of their own pockets. Once a township road is accepted, the township's current policy is we don't pay for that. So that's why we felt it appropriate, even though, like Mike said, this wasn't on our 5-year plan, the same thing kind of applies to Birchmont Court. If there's a small portion that needs to be repaved, then those things are borne by townships since they are township roads. That's all we can say with that.
And potentially the last question here, asking a follow-up on the right-of-way, 40 to 60 feet right-of-way. Does that imply that trees or existing buildings within 40 to 60 feet of the center of the road could be impacted? Just trying to understand what is at risk during the entirety of the project. I appreciate that the roadway will maintain likely as is, just don't have a comfort level that existing structures now won't be impacted. Thank you.
Good.
And that's
a great.
That's Lavinia Road they're talking about?
Yeah, it must be, because this is a follow-up from the previous one.
So specifically on Lavinia Road, that's a great follow-up and a clarification. There seems to be some question there about what the right-of-way is. That 40 to 80 feet I'm mentioning is a total right-of-way, not from center line out. That's a total right-of-way that exists through those different areas, and it does vary. There are, we have our topographic survey done of all of Lavinia Road, northerly of Beach Lane. And there are no structures that are proposed to be taken out. No residential structures need to be moved, relocated, demolished, nothing. There are a few trees that fall way within the right of way. As some of you are aware, driving up and down that certainly, there are a couple that are very, very close to the road that will need to come out. But again, trying to minimize that to the greatest extent possible is what our goal is. If this project was one where we're reconstructing, they've mentioned some of the other township road projects, then the township policy is to clear the entire right-of-way, but those are for full reconstructs where we meet all new standards. We are not going to meet new standards with this. We cannot meet new standards in this corridor, so we need to just put that road back as it was. And again, only secondary removals would be required from a tree standpoint.
Thank you. Chris, do you think, should we open it up for a second, see if anybody online has anything? Is there a way to do that?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Just
sorry.
set, yeah.
Okay. You know, we've been there for a while now, but I sure, like I said, there'll be other meetings in the future too, but like I said, we do want to take this chance to answer questions and the best we can. So if anybody else, please come forward.
I have something, just a few things.
Sure.
I don't want to come forward.
What's
But,
that?
you know, I'm just sitting here tonight, and we've gone through many of these meetings, and I know that you guys have received petitions, right? Signed petitions.
Okay.
Where 85% of Lavinia Road did not want it. And you know Birchmont Court, there are some people on there, but the majority no.
Okay.
Okay. The other comment that I was wondering about is 70% of septic systems are failed. I want to know how they know that, and also, just because a septic system is old does not mean it's failed. And that's something you guys have presumed from the very first thing when Chris started. When he put up that map with all the red things and saying all these are old septic systems, but that doesn't mean they're failed. And as we know, Sarah was here, very knowledgeable Sarah, was talking about, she has seen them 30, 40 years old and still working great. And not just a few of them, a lot of them, many of them, she said. The other thing I wanted to say is that I know a few meetings ago, Chris sort of lost patience with all of us out here, sort of said to us, you know, this, you guys said you didn't want to be annexed. This is what we're doing to not be annexed. Do you remember that, Chris?
Kurt.
And then you said, Kurt, sorry. And then you said, oh, and clean up the water as an afterthought. And you should have that on recording somewhere. Stuff. I took notes on that one. Also, the worst thing is you already told us you were going to pass this a few meetings ago. You said no matter what we said or did, you were going to pass it. So you did say that.
Yeah, I respect your opinion, Jill, on something what you say here. The truth is that we know that we need to do something here. Our board has made a decision already that we want to move forward with something. We are looking to do whatever we can to minimize impact, to make it as cost effective as possible. We know something needs to happen. Like I said, we've told you already, we have not wavered. That we know that it's not a matter of whether this project is going to happen. It's a matter of whether Northern Township's going to do it, and whether you residents want to be members of Northern Township. We have heard that, and I think it's naive to think that something's not going to happen to these properties at some point because they are valuable properties. There is a need. I mean, if these gentlemen here who came here and drive through the areas and looked at stuff, they've told us what they feel about how the areas look in the mound systems and some of where how the housings are set and the size of the lots. People know there's issues. It's not really debatable. I mean, it's truth that there is issues. I know you have a different opinion, and I respect your opinion, but I mean, we have to go with the facts of what we have, and we're trying to do what we feel like the residents of this community want. We know not everybody, but I guess that's all I can really say.
And then just one thing I wanted to clarify on, the 70% of septics are failing. Again, just to clarify, that's nothing that the board here, myself, or anything has ever said. We're pointing out the ages, and there is the assumption in there that there's plenty of them that are potentially failing. And then I was going to point out Brian Grunt. He did make that comment, and he's doing it from a place of knowing data from, I can't remember all the groups that you said that do that, but they do make those assumptions based on their past research and whatnot. So just wanted to clear up that this board hasn't made that statement that 70% of septics are failing. We're just pointing out the ages, and there are other people, of course, that have said that, and we have to assume, given the ages, that there are some quantity that are failing. And if we did do this inspection, like they were talking about in Hubbard County or something, there would be many people who would be replacing septic systems at that point.
Does anybody else have anything they want to offer here that's been here for visitors, or Mark, or?
Oh, we do have one more.
Sure. You want to come up, Steve, so we can hear it better?
Here, Steve Hill. I had a lot of experience with septic systems, so, and Brian has too. It isn't about the septics, it's about the annexation and what you guys are doing. You're gonna do it, and we expect that it's gonna be done. But let's remember, Rutgers caused this whole thing, and the greater good, right? We're doing it for the greater good. So the people that are affected, the 190 or whatever you said, they shouldn't be assessed at all. It should be done by the greater good. The residents are going to pay to hook up. That should be their only contribution, in my opinion. I think somebody else should pay for the mains And if we're gonna help the whole town, people are saying they don't live on Lake Bemidji, but they use it. I don't think it's fair to ask the residents to pay anything but their hookups. But that's my opinion.
I appreciate your opinion. Thank you.
Do you have one more?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, one more in line. Can you please describe dewatering to be done at Lavinia? Also, will it be required at all on Birchmont Court?
So dewatering, for those of you who don't know, is a process by which we lower the water table temporarily in order to allow for installation of mains down where there is water into the ground currently. Water will be present for almost the entirety of the north end of the lake and the bulk of the east side of the lake without question. Undoubtedly, that water table is within 3 to 7 feet of the surface right now, and our mains will be going in at 6 to 13 feet below, and our lift stations will be lower still. So that dewatering will need to take place. The water will be pulled out. We need to monitor that and meet all MPCA requirements for the contractor that would do that during the construction process. Predominantly, that becomes the discharge. The discharge cannot create a nuisance condition where that is being discharged, but again, it's clean groundwater at that point that is being discharged. Will be necessary for the predominance of this project corridor. There are some areas within the state park where we know that we've got much higher ground conditions where that wouldn't be necessary. We've also got some areas of the project where we will be doing directional boring, not necessary for the bulk of those directional bores. But again, at lift station locations and the bulk of the main installations, dewatering will be needed to temporarily reduce that groundwater elevation.
One more question about the average of 14K. Does that also include the hookup from the road to the house, or is that a separate fee that the owner is responsible for?
Mark, do you want to answer that?
Absolutely, that's just the assessment. Everything we're doing here is just the assessment. So no, there are those other costs that are borne by the homeowner to connect up. So this would leave a stub at the right of way.
Yeah.
So, good question. Yeah, it's a good question. It's good to, thanks for bringing that up. That's a good question. Good.
Hello, my name is William Smith. I live at 2635 Pearl Drive. I've been involved in Northern Township planning issues for somewhere between 20 and 25 years, pretty much continuously. And I know it's very hard to, I mean, the amount of work that the board and the planning people put into doing these things is phenomenal. And most of the public is completely unaware of this. You know, our meetings are not attended in general. People just don't know. They think this is done willy-nilly. It is not. Lots and lots of thought goes into this. And I applaud the board. Thank you all for your work. All the consultants, you've done a great job for us. I want to say that I believe the economics of this plan favors a centralized system. I think the presentation is pretty darn clear. It makes sense financially. The environmental factors favor a centralized system. That I think is also very clear. I think a number of the comments have demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of representative democracy. It's not just for the lake property owner or the business owner. It's all of us. We are a community and we're all in it together. And I would like to say also, communal problems are not solved by picking out the owners, and I use X amount. You know, if I get 0 mail or I get 100 letters a day, we all pay the same postal service rates. I don't have kids in school anymore. I pay school taxes. We're a community, and we don't. There is no way to meter. Oh, you use 35 gallons, and I'm going to have you signed by law so that you never use more because I set your rate based on that. What if that 3-bedroom house gets sold to a family with 12 kids? You know, we don't have a system to monitor that. It's not realistic. So thank you. That's all.
Anybody else? Please come forward.
Laura Block, I'm from 65315 Lavinia Drive Northeast, and echo some of the concerns. I too appreciate that a community involvement assessment would have been so imperative. My husband and I have lived at our property for 5 years, and we have been invited to things that said, come to an annual meeting, but never once did it say there'll be an annexation vote, or there will be like a transparent agenda that would have let us know early on we should have been involved and let our voices heard. We've tried to be respectful about our questions and concerns along the way. I still think there's a lot of data that's lacking that if it was provided would be helpful. When you say there's 30% flow that is the commercial use, for someone who looks at the number of individual seasonal cabins and then sees a place like just one place, Rutgers, 58 hotel rooms, cabins, 105 people at a conference room, you know, your mind races with how much flow they would have. And when you mentioned in your feasibility, you said, are there any other services that could be provided? And I believe the special assessment statute even says that needs to be considered. Water being added would be most efficient. I agree that pairing up with people who already have amenities can be most efficient. I'm not trying to weigh in on the annexation or the non-annexation, but I think the reason people are inflamed about annexation is the same reason they are about this project. If you don't see value, but you have a cost, and this cost for us at Lavinia, it's aesthetically and it's financially. So it's easy to say we all want great water quality, but for those that aren't taking out their checkbook and writing a check for $40,000 and then seeing their trees come down, which was the most important reason they were on that property. And I also think information needs to be provided as far as the life of septic systems. If you go online, I found 3 counties. Go to Scott County. Scott County, Minnesota says the life of an individual septic system is indefinite. It's all about maintenance. And for the gentleman who says he doesn't change his furnace filter and he's part of this project, that scared me. That was like a red, yellow flag. Because I changed my furnace filter. I'm just saying, somebody came up here and said, be concerned. I don't think my septic is failing. I take the responsibility for maintaining my property, which includes my roof. And if you offered me a new roof right now, when I have a new roof, I'd probably say I don't see the value in that either. So again, some of the data points that might be important would be to give us that so we could look at it, to let questions and answers be posted so we can go review them. Instead, we had a long amount of information many of us had read, and it felt there wasn't that feedback loop that communication is versus, you know, the talking to and from. Last thing I'll say is you have your attorney here. When I've read about special assessments, I think Chris continues to say, well, it has to be a similar way, but it's per property, and aren't there different classes of property? I go to Mr. Hill's comments. Why couldn't a commercial class of property, and I'm not talking about the fee, I'm talking about the assessment. Why can't they have an assessment that's different than an individual, where you have one person in a small cottage that's used, been in the family for 6 years or 6 generations? Why can't that be different than, again, I don't mean to singular out, I'm glad we have Rutgers, but when you look at the scale and they're wanting to expand, why would their square footage equate to an assessment like this individual, the one lady, one house? So again, I'm just asking for information, for better communication, and I do appreciate your efforts, and I hope you appreciate our feedback.
Thank you. I'm just going to make one clarification on that, Jason, if you want to try to answer that question the best you can. First thing, we've never called for a vote on things. Like, again, I'm going to say this again, I've said this many times. When we were at that meeting, we very clearly had asked for all residents to come to that meeting at the fairgrounds, whatever, 3 or 4 years ago. One of the residents raised his hand, and it was obvious that the people voted there. We said we would not do that. We've never came to a vote either with incorporation. We've put on the agenda meetings to talk about incorporation, talk about things. So all we can go on is like what the people who show up and talk. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with these things. And we also know that right now we're talking about the sewer system, and we totally expect the ones who are showing up here are the ones who have concerns. The ones who are completely good with this, they're not generally showing up. Some people are, there's maybe a couple of you guys that aren't, and I appreciate it, but generally that's the way this is, in my history of doing this, that's the way it kind of works. So I don't expect, I understand it. For you new residents, we've tried to work through things, and that's why we've put out things for extensions and timeframes. But the assessment part, I think that Jason needs to kind of explain that if he can a little bit, and if you can say it without the microphone, that's fine, but whatever works for you. If you look up here, let's try to use it.
Well, no, I can answer. I mean,
Can you
certainly.
stand up, please, so you can hear, see your voice project better?
Thanks. Is that better?
Yes.
From an assessment valuation point, they are being viewed differently. Rutgers is not paying $14,000. They're paying it proportionate to their size, and that's how they're viewing it. So it is being viewed differently. And I understand everyone, you know, there's the concern with the cost, and the board's doing the best job they can to find funding. But with regard to, and maybe Mark might have more of this in the feasibility report, but there is a different rate for those commercial uses. So they're not being treated the same, which, you know, the township is doing its best to treat its residents best they can.
Sure. Go ahead.
Could you answer my question though? Could there be, instead of square footage, which might apply to individual, could there be a different model that could apply to commercial? That was my question. Because I've heard we have to have it all be the same. Isn't it the same per class? And can't there be different classes of property in the assessment?
There are different ways to look at it. You can do it a couple different ways. And the township has explored different ways and ultimately settled on this way.
What were the other ways they explored? They said it earlier.
We did look at treating,
What was it? Do you want to say, Chris? Or, I mean, 'cause-
So one was just simple square footage. The bigger your square footage of your lot was, the more your assessment was, and the smaller square footage was, the smaller it was. The state park paid just an astronomical amount compared to everybody else because they're gigantic. And they, I don't know, it obviously just wasn't going to work. What was the other one? I just lost it, sorry. Was the EDU method. And again, that stands for equivalent dwelling units. So there you're kind of looking at each person as a user of the system, spreading it out across all of the residents with single family houses, basically the same. And what ends up happening there is that average assessment goes up 30% to something in the 18,000 range. And again, a lot of people have smaller lots. So for them, it's going up like 150%. The effect that had was much greater, moving assessments up for everybody than doing it this way. On that EDU 1-2. I think that was mainly just the thing, is that it was negatively affecting a lot more people than this way. There isn't a perfect way to do it when it's all said and done. You have to pick one that hopefully works what you would think is the most equitably among them, and that's what we went with.
Joseph, go ahead, Mike.
I think, Steve, I want to go back to your question. You talked about, you know, this project benefits everyone and everyone should probably participate in it, meaning township-wide. Well.
No, I meant regional-wide.
Okay, well, we only have authority inside the township. So that's why we didn't pay for this, you know, that's why the city couldn't get us paid for the Sanford Center. We're not in the city of Bemidji. So, but we really can't go out unless we were to look at a sewer district for the whole township. There has to be a benefit to have an assessment. And in a sewer district, you can do it differently. You know, to a point, you can't, you know, there still has to be a benefit, but it could cover a greater area. A district is like, could be the whole township. Okay, but in order to have an assessment, you have to have a direct benefit. And the majority of the township, or a certain percentage of the township's not benefiting by this project. So therefore, that we can't assess it to everybody in the township. That's number one. When it came time to look at, you know, a lot of this gets dumped back on Rutgers, you know, that they were what started the whole ball. Yes, I have to tell you, this has been going on a lot longer than Rutgers. But when Rutgers worked with the city of Bemidji about possible taking care, you know, getting municipal services extended out for them, that's what pushed the township into this. But it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. Because, you know, in the end, we're looking at several things that are going to happen here. And is annexation a part of it? This is going to benefit us if we go that if we go the incorporation route. So, you know, it's not a perfect world.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just going to add quick to that. It did start with Rutgers started the first question. The DNR also started asking questions about whether, because they knew County Road 20 was coming up, the county started asking the questions. All those things with multiple people started asking questions. We started seeing like where there was with this. And honestly, we wouldn't have gotten any $6 million in grant money. We probably wouldn't be here, but we did. We got $6 million, or almost half the project to be paid for. When those things all started lining up, County Road 20 is happening, saving $1 million+ off the project. We got $6 million in federal grant dollars. Rutgers has a need where they're going to hook up immediately. The DNR has a need, they want to hook up immediately. All of a sudden, all these things start lining up where we have a significant amount of users who are going to hook up immediately. And this also, by that happening, gives people who don't need it right away, that gives us the opportunity to look back at people like yourself who maybe need 10, 15 years before to utilize their systems they have. By the things that are happening, it's given us a lot more options and saving us a lot of money to do those things. So there's just a lot of stars aligning here that it's seeming like it's about the best opportunity that we have right now to do something as cost effective as possible and to benefit people hopefully the best we can and hopefully not to hinder people any more than as little as we possibly can. That's where I'm at. All right.
Just one more point of clarification. Are we for sure going the 50-foot setback in the greater density?
Those are already in the ordinance, aren't they?
Correct.
That's already ordinance in our ordinance already. Sewer and unsewered areas. Somebody else stood up earlier if they had a question. Is that you? Sure.
I did, but and many people on the board and people out here.
Oh, can you say your name? Can you say your name, please? Your name, please, sir.
Troy Green.
Troy Green, thank you, Troy.
Have mentioned this is going to benefit the entire township.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be benefit to this. There's going to be benefit to that. There's benefit to the entire township. Yet, I don't mean to pick on you. You say, if they don't have benefit, they can't be taxed, they can't be assessed. If it's going to benefit the entire township should have a dog in the fight.
And that's fair. And I guess the part that I will say back is that just for example, and I'll use Steve for an example. Steve has a development where he builds a road, he pays for it out of his own pocket. The entire township benefits because Steve put that development in and he paved that road. We now get more tax dollars. There's a truth to that everybody benefits, but that doesn't mean that the township has paid for Steve's roads. A Deer Path, the same thing. The township didn't pay for their road. I mean, they still have to do what they have to do. The township, everybody benefits. Everybody's benefiting. So that's my point. I think we're all benefiting from people being able to use their properties to the best extent they can, being able to protect our lake, which is a benefit for all of us here. We're all benefiting from it, but like I said, not everybody's paying for those things all the time. Some people have to pay for certain things.
Well, and isn't the clarity that the assessment law says you have to have a financial benefit, like it has to increase your property value?
Yeah, for assessments, yes.
Yeah, it's not just that feeling good benefit.
For the assessments, correct. But the township is, again, paying over $1 million towards the roads on this project, out of the roads funds of the township. So this isn't going unpaid for by the rest of the township. The township is contributing a considerable amount of money. We generally have about a $400,000 budget in our roads. This is a big chunk of our township road funds for a number of years. Anybody else want to speak, please? Yes, we have a lot of experts here. If anybody who has any technical questions, these guys are here, and I don't know if they'll be here again in the future, but like I said, if you have any technical ones, please come forward. Sure.
This is just from the conversation that we've had today. Some people are saying some of the properties that are going to be impacted only have 4 months of use, and so maybe those septics have a longer life and they shouldn't pay as much. But part of me wonders, is an unused septic healthy? Like, is there freeze capability and then leakage, or or does that extend its life?
Definitely not a direct extension of life, cannot be extrapolated out by just less use in any given year. In fact, there are some detrimental elements to that.
Like no warm water going in.
Correct, and that those organisms that need the food that you're being fed, when those are shutting down for that many months, that certainly can be detrimental to systems. So your extension, Mr. Welly, is not a direct extension. That less use equals longer life.
It can make a difference, though. A big difference. Might not be numerical.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak or have any questions? Last, anybody else online? All right. If nothing else, I guess I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there a motion?
Yes.
Make a motion.
A motion by Mike, second by Kurt. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming, everybody.
I'm done.